Football Podcast with Nick Meyer and Willie J. Today we bring to you the NFC South, NFC East deep breakdowns, prognostications, players. You're going to hear everything for both of these divisions. We're going to go over all the players. We're going to talk about all the things. If you weren't here last year, this is where we started off last year. This was our first set of episodes, and each one of these was like a 3-hour breakdown. Now, I think that this will go a little bit quicker than last year because we've said what we wanted to about a lot of these players already. But if you haven't listened to us, and this is your first exposure, we will go over almost every one of these teams. This is, in my opinion, a pretty good starting place for people who haven't played fantasy before, or if you just don't know what the heck's going on with the team, or you stepped out for a little bit and you're coming back. Welcome. And here is the NFC South and the NFC East. So, Willie, how are you doing? How's it going?
I'm doing good. I'm excited. This is I love just talking about football, and this is a great breakdown. I really enjoy how we have talked about each team, and so if you are doing your fantasy drafts and you want to revisit how each player you drafted kind of fits into the team that you drafted him from, and for Dynasty, I really enjoyed doing this last year. And this one's for the real sickos because it's May, and just hearing that music and getting started is getting me excited.
Yeah. This is it's starting again, but and not really. Again, last year Willie said it exactly right. I said this as well. This is for the sickos. You're here with us right now listening to this. We appreciate you because you're the heart blood of fantasy football. Really, you're the ones that keep this moving. I'm sure half of you are commissioners of your leagues. Just always thinking about it. And that's how I am, unfortunately. I still find myself during the off season consistently checking all of my news sources for NFL news, even though 90% of the time nothing's happening at all. But here we are. So, but we do have some. There has been a lot of changes. Of course, it's a new season, as always in the NFL. Teams look pretty different. The NFC South, NFC East in particular have some changes, and we're just going to go over it because there's always value. It doesn't matter what team you are in the NFL. You can be the worst team, and there's some hidden value that exists within your squad for someone's team.
I guarantee at least one team we talk about today is going to have a winning record and surprise a lot of people, or vice versa. The amount of parity in the NFL is a reason I love the sport. It's getting better in the NBA and in other major sports in the US, but in NFL, parity is king, and that's what makes it exciting. And some of it is injuries. Does swing a team, especially when it's a quarterback. But just the level of excitement you can get as a fan of pretty much any team except for the Browns and the Jets, going into the year with a new roster it's something to look forward
to. I'm a little jealous sometimes of Browns and Jets fans. As Raiders fans, it feels like every year I have the opportunity to feel good about myself, and then we just end up in the same place as they are. So
just the mediocrity, dwelling in mediocrity is not the greatest.
It's not, but here I was hoping things change for everyone. Willie got to see the Bears make the playoffs, and I guarantee at least 2 teams that we talk about today will be playoff contenders.
At least 2, yeah, that is true.
Maybe more, but at least 2. Before we jump into the breakdowns, let's talk about a little bit of news, which there hasn't been a whole lot, but there has been one really big breaking piece of news that's happened just recently this week. Josh Jacobs, of course, has turned himself in to the police in his local area. He is charged with 5 different charges, at least 1 felony. I think the other 4 are misdemeanors. And as you may have heard, they're all pretty serious things related to domestic violence. Now, because we do the NFC North episode next, I don't think we're going to really jump too far into this. What I will say is that right now, anything you hear is speculation. Because we've seen with the NFL, they don't like it when things get too hot. This is happening at a time in the off season, in my opinion, that if these charges are all dropped, we might see Josh Jacobs play the whole next year. And if he gets charged with any of them, we might not see him for a long time or ever again. So the range of outcomes is so wide and so different. It's hard to speculate.
When it comes to violence against women in the NFL, they don't have a great track record, and sometimes players will get serious suspensions and be held accountable, and sometimes absolutely nothing happens, even if they are found guilty or take a plea. I mean, I think a big recent case is James Pierce Jr. of the Atlanta Falcons. He was a rookie last year. He had some pretty serious charges. I don't recall if they exactly where they were, if they were dropped or a settlement was reached, but I know he's not actively facing any suspensions. And we see this quite often. In the case of Josh Jacobs, one of the things that stands out about this is the fact that he not only has 5 distinct charges, but he has a felony strangulation charge. Um, you know, extremely, extremely serious allegations, and they are just allegations for now. But we've seen players be held accountable and have talks of suspension for less serious things. Felony strangulation is an extremely, extremely serious charge. We'll see how this plays out, but it's the kind of situation where Jacobs might not ever play in the NFL again. It's pretty serious.
Yeah, I mean, to me, if it'd be like if Ray Rice didn't have video, at this point, and if who knows what would have happened. And that's the hard part for me. It's like, yeah, if anything comes out and we have any definitive proof, it wouldn't shock me if he's like banned a season and then just gone.
Yeah.
But if video never comes out or like proof never comes out or what have you, it's just May.
Yeah.
And I think like it hit news pretty hard, but it didn't hit news that hard. So we'll see. And it's the ball's in the NFL's court.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it's in a lot of people's courts, but
it's in the courts too.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting. I'm to being completely unbiased here as a Bears fan. Like, I think the best scenario is that he's held accountable if he's guilty, and the Packers don't have a running back. Now, unbiased talking about this though, if Jacobs does miss time, the Packers do not have any depth behind him. So this is a very, purely from just entertainment fantasy perspective, this could be very interesting for the Packers and for Jacobs' career. So, we might not hear much news for a while, but this is definitely something to look out for.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, whoever ends up on the Packers, I don't think they're going to go with Marshawn Lloyd and whoever their 4th RB was last year. I think they're going to have someone add it to this team if he is gone. And if he is gone, it changes the way their offense works. But we'll talk more about that in a couple weeks. For now, let's just move into the breakdowns. Let's jump right into this thing because this could go for a while. We're going to start off with the NFC South. You may remember them for having one of the final week games that chose who got into the playoffs and who did not. And that was, of course, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Carolina Panthers were competing for a playoff spot. And the Panthers ultimately got it in one of the craziest meltdowns of a team that I've seen in a while, with the Buccaneers looking like the hottest thing in the world to falling off the face of the earth. But so the NFC South, always an interesting division. I have like my own personal thoughts about the teams as like just their identities in general, like regardless of what year it is. I have some thoughts about some of these teams, but I'll save that for the end. Okay, let's start off with the Atlanta Falcons. So the Atlanta Falcons, they went 8-9 last year, and they fired Raheem Morris. They fired their whole entire coaching staff because it just was not working. So they've got a new head coach in. He's Kevin Stefanski. Kevin Stefanski is a familiar name because he was the head coach of the Browns last year and many years prior to that. He brings in with him the offensive coordinator, Tommy Rees. He was the offensive coordinator for the Browns last season. Prior to that, he was the offensive coordinator for the University of Alabama. And then the defensive coordinator, Jeff Ulbrich. So this is a team that had Kirk Cousins just absolutely stink for them after Michael Penix tore his ACL. And I can't remember if his ACL was the same one or if it was a different one. I think it was both the second knee now that's been torn.
Yes, I believe he's torn both of his ACLs at least once.
So the team that like 2 or 3 years ago was clowned on for taking a quarterback after paying Kirk Cousins heavily now lost both of those quarterbacks for at least a little bit. And they brought in to at least take the hint for a little bit if Penix isn't ready, or to compete with Penix if he is ready. Tua Tagovailoa, another quarterback who has, I don't want to say flamed out of the NFL because he hasn't clearly. He's on the Falcons, but he's pretty close.
He's close. I mean, the Dolphins took a $99 million cap hit to cut him. So clearly the Dolphins, looking at it in a vacuum, that looks pretty egregious, but the Dolphins are in full rebuild. They also have a new coaching staff. So Tua, just signing a vet minimum to be with the Falcons doesn't mean he's washed. He's not inherently just a backup quarterback forever now. This is one of probably his last chances to be a starter. But I think it's a great deal for the Falcons because with Cousins gone now, and Penix having torn his ACL in November, like it feels like Tua is most likely going to be the week 1 starter. And the fact that they had someone who was at least starting in the NFL last year is really a bonus for them, I think.
It's interesting too, because I think with Tua, this is not only a great deal, but like having 2 left-handed quarterbacks, I don't know how much the side you throw from changes your offense, but from what I've seen, at least of left-handed quarterbacks coming in and coming out, it seems like it does change it pretty significantly as far as where the X receiver is.
Yeah. And where the offensive line lines up, and that plays a bigger difference.
So I think that this was a pretty good catch for them getting Tua. Now, mind you, what we saw of Tua in the last couple of years has been really awful. It was really poor quarterback play that couldn't really sustain any sort of fantasy relevance. So you have to hope that if he comes in, he can actually sustain this relevance. But let's talk about who's actually on this team right now. So you've got Penix, you've got Tua Tagovailoa. Not super exciting. You do have the running backs though, and this is where like your bread and butter is, especially because Kevin Stefanski, when he had success with the Browns, was not solely through the running game, but primarily through the running game. He is a guy who loves a good running game, and he gets to work with Bijan Robinson, who, we all know how good that guy is, and also Brian Robinson. And already, if you are a trading person, you already have found out the exploit in this year's draft is that B-Rob and B-Rob are on the same team. One is named Junior, and it is the backup, Brian Robinson Jr. But how could they pick up Brian Robinson Jr. when they have Bijan Robinson? Are we being toyed with, Willie?
It seems like it reminds me of on the Browns when the Browns had Ned Chubb along with Nick Chubb. I'm just kidding. No, it is confusing. It is a good pickup though, I think, because the Falcons lost Tyler Algier, and we didn't really see it from Brian Robinson last year on the Niners because CMC was healthy the whole year, but he's a very solid RB2. So, there's some nuance here, but I think Algier to Brian Robinson is a pretty solid, 1-to-1 replacement. And we saw, regardless of who the RB2 is in this offense, Bijan is the dominant player, and he has that easy, not only RB1 overall upside, but like 101 draft pick kind of upside going into the year.
And we have seen with the Kevin Stefanski-led offense, because although they have Tommy Rees as the offensive coordinator, it's going to be a Kevin Stefanski-led offense. In 2020, I believe was the year the Browns were the 3rd overall ranked offense, and it was almost solely on the back of Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Mm-hmm. And both of those were solid producers for fantasy. So if you think that there's a world in which, Brian Robinson has that Kareem Hunt role, which a little iffy for me because I don't know how he is as a pass catcher, but maybe there's something there. They could get a lot of touchdowns.
Yeah.
And I think so. Like this is a backfield I love. Bijan Robinson. There's not a lot to talk about. He's like you said, a potential number 1 overall pick already. So like if you like Bijan Robinson's game, I don't really see it having a significant statistical downgrade from this news. This is good news for him as far as I can tell. Mm-hmm. And then Brian Robinson Jr. maybe more relevant than Tyler Algier was because he'll probably get more consistent work. I think the run game is going to be heavily leaned upon regardless of who starts at quarterback.
Exactly. And we saw last year Algier, vulture quite a bit of touchdowns from Bijan. It's not like Algier was necessarily a draftable player except as a handcuff, but at the same time, like he was definitely streamable. And if Bijan does go down, like he's a great handcuff. We said that about him last year of CMC, but I do think that in this offense compared to the Niners offense last year, I think Brian Robinson is a much more valuable asset than he was last year.
Yeah, and I mean, okay, so let's take a look at the pass catchers on this team as well, because this is part of it, right? So the pass catchers on the Falcons, so you have Drake London. They also drafted Zachariah Branch, I believe, in the 3rd round. Then you've got who? Jahan Dotson. We've seen one flash from Jahan Dotson, not really anything consistent. And when asked to be more than what he was prior, well, he went from the Commanders to the Falcons. So you can understand how it didn't go very well for that. We have Kyle Pitts, who had probably the best game of any tight end in fantasy football last year. And
one of the best ever games. Yeah.
just an insane game, but also has not been able to do that by any means until that one particular game. Like he had an okay rookie season that was a ton of yards and no touchdowns. And then he's just been a complete dropout. I mean, if you're playing and you know Kyle Pitts, he's forever the golden guy who you cannot get because he will tank your season. Unless you happen to play him one week where he scored over 50 points.
Yeah.
And you'll see a lot of things about where he finished as a tight end last season and like his potential for the future. Just remember that 50-point game alone probably buoyed his whole entire season. Without that, he was not doing anything consistent. He wasn't really a playable piece.
I think it raised his overall tight end finish like 9 or more spots, which sounds ridiculous, but like he's a tight end, so like there's not a lot of fluctuation there. I think that if he hadn't had that, big blow up game, he would have finished as a mid end or tight end 2. And depending on your league and your roster, tight end 2s aren't even inherently rosterable. So he's not someone to get excited about.
Yeah. So here's the question for me. All right. So Kyle Stefanski, he's coming off of 2 really terrible seasons with the Browns. Now, of course, we know with the Browns, there's quarterback issues, there's running back issues, there's a lot of issues. But he finished 32nd in offensive efficiency in 2024 and 2025. 2 years in a row as the worst offensive team in the league. He comes to Atlanta with better players.
Much better.
And do we like him enough to then draft the pass catchers on a team where the quarterback is still a question mark?
I mean, yeah, looking at the pass catchers with the running back, it's not a huge upgrade, but it's nothing. He's not going to be worse than it was offensively last year for the Falcons. He can only get better with Stefanski, I think, in the run game. With the pass catchers, I think there's some diamonds in the rough here, but this team as a whole, despite the upgrades and the new changes, I don't really see much, movement from where some of these guys finish. I think that, Drake London is obviously the standout. If he hadn't gotten injured last year and missed a few games, he would have been a wide receiver 1. And I think that he is worth, a 2nd round pick or around there this year. Mm-hmm. And that's saying this for both what we've seen with him in Penix and what we've seen Tua produce in the past with receivers like Hill and Waddle. And, Tua is not the same quarterback he was 2 or 3 years ago, but London has produced with Desmond Ridder. So I think that London only getting better seems pretty logical. I don't know if he's going to blow up into a top 5 wide receiver, but he definitely has that potential in those traits.
Yeah, he has a lot of talent. He can take over games at a time if he's given the opportunity. With the Falcons, they're a weird team. We see it happen a lot. So is there any situations between the starting quarterbacks where if it's Penix or if it's Tua that this matters to you?
We'll have to see week 1 Tua or, a couple weeks of Tua to get a read on how he plays. But I think this is kind of a win-win because either Tua returns to his form a couple years ago in terms of how he feeds his receivers, and that benefits London, or Tua is so bad and Penix is back from the injury that we at least see what we saw from Penix and London last year, which was, pretty dang solid at times.
Yeah, so what I'm thinking with this team is let's say Drake London is going in the top 2 rounds again, right here, like the bottom half of the 2nd round. Is he worth that pick? Like, is that something that you're willing to, with the information that we have right now, put your name on and say, let's go get Drake London, pick number 19?
Yes, I do. I think that's around where I had him last year, and maybe a little bit higher. And you could say his ceiling is capped because, Penix, while he's played pretty okay at times, he hasn't been, elite. He hasn't turned into that like Drake May, Caleb Williams type 1st round quarterback that we saw. But having said that, I think I feel the same about London as I did last year, and a lot of what we predicted about his finish last year, injury notwithstanding, came to fruition. And I think that he's absolutely worth a 2nd round pick.
How about Kyle Pitts? I'm going to see him in that tight end dead zone, probably around round 4, round 5, round 6, somewhere in there. This is early guessing. This isn't based on ADP at this moment at all because it's still the end of May. So, but are you willing to have him as your tight end one going into the season?
No, there's nothing that we saw from him last year, or nothing that we see from his age profile. Like if we're banking on a year, is it year 6 breakout? Like, in theory it could happen, but a year 6 breakout could come from like a K Dotton as well. Kyle Pitts is always going to be drafted higher than he is relative to his possible breakout. So you can get an actual like tight end that has a higher likelihood of a breakout, like probably 10 rounds later, and make it work.
I suppose I've buried the lead here a little bit because I want to ask you about one of your favorite players from last year, just because they do have another wide receiver. He's not his first stint on the team, but he is new to the team this year in this version of it. We also have Olamide Zaccheaus joining the team, formerly with the Bears. Hence all the jokes about the Bears. Anyway, so does Olamide have any role? Like any of these players that aren't these two have a role? Because I think for me, the beauty of Drake London and Kyle Pitts in any format is the fact that I think the passing game is going to be funneled through those two. I don't really see a lot of breakout potential for these other guys. There's Zachariah Branch, who I suppose just being a rookie is a little exciting, but other than that, I don't know. So do you see any of these role players as someone who you may want to take a flyer on?
I mean, so I would say that like, Jahan Dotson and, Zaccheaus are both players that could potentially break out, but like, using the comparison of K Dot and Kyle Pitts, like we could see like I don't know, like a Parker Washington on the Jaguars or a Pat Bryant on the Broncos break out just as likely. I don't think either of these guys are draftable. I think at best they can replicate maybe what we saw with Darnell Mooney a couple years ago, and to clarify, a couple years ago. So they're streamable guys to watch. And if London goes down, like there's going to have to be an alpha here, and it could be Zaccheaus or Dotson. But in terms of draft strategy, and I've gone on record talking about him before, but I really, really do like Zachariah Branch. He's a 3rd-round rookie out of Georgia. I'm a bit biased because I watched him as a rookie in college at USC with Caleb Williams, and he came out as a 5-star recruit. So he looked awesome with Williams, and you can make the argument that Tua is the best quarterback he's played with since Caleb Williams, because he had Gunnar Stockton at Georgia last year. But having said all that, like I think Branch is somebody that I personally am going to be targeting in the last 2 rounds of my draft, just because of his player profile, and really little to do with a strong faith in the Falcons offense or passing game outside of Drake London. But I really do like Branch as one of my favorite rookies. So if you're going to target these guys outside of London, I would fade everybody but a late round pick of Branch, perhaps.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. And just for context, for last year, they finished top 10 in rushing yards, middle of the pack in rushing touchdowns, and then middle of the pack passing yards, but bottom 5 in passing touchdowns. And I don't really see a huge. Stefanski's profile says that maybe the rushing touchdowns will come up, and everything else will probably stay pretty similar to what it was.
Having said that, though, Stefanski's inept offenses were coupled with the Browns' elite defense, and the Falcons' defense, it's a question mark right now. It could be really good. They've drafted really well the past couple of years, but I would be hard pressed to predict that we're going to see a repeat of the Browns' defense the past couple of years. So the run game being so good in Cleveland is because of elite running backs, but also because they were at least getting the ball back in the hands of the offense, and we might not see that as much this year.
Stefanski's such an interesting head coach to watch because people love his offenses. They think they're great, but we haven't seen anything even slightly productive since the Deshaun Watson trade was made. So, does he have that ability to bring these players and the offense around him? Because the offenses have been god awful for an offensive-minded coach. Like, regardless of who's playing, they're so bad. So, Falcons are an interesting one to watch. I don't have like a ton of faith in them personally, and just in general, this is one of those. Not this year. In general, the Falcons are a team that unless they are fully stacked, I don't believe in them.
Yeah, I'm on the same page. But having said that, I mean, Bijan, expect him to repeat what he did last year. Yeah,
Bijan's a smash pick with a team with this like little over the top huge talent and also potential to score points. you're going to want the guy who's going to be the focal point of that. And Bijan, we've already seen, can do it. He has this crazy skill. Just awesome.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next team. So next up, we're going to talk about the New Orleans Saints. Last year, 6-11. Although managing to stay pretty competitive in a lot of games, you guess they wouldn't. They are relatively static coach-wise. They still have Kellen Moore as a head coach, Doug Nussmeier as the OC, Brandon Staley's the DC. They did add a couple different players here. Zach Wilson at QB, they've added because they want 3 vaguely startable quarterbacks. But no, they return with Tyler Shook, who flashed potential last year. He's one of the older quarterbacks that are drafted. So if he didn't flash potential, that would be bad, but he did. And so they've added Travis Etienne to their running back room, which Travis Etienne and Alvin Kamara, and it is an old Kamara who hasn't shown really the same level of skill as he's had in the past, but adding Travis Etienne and Alvin Kamara, so it looks like a pretty good running back room. And then you have this wide receiver group that added Jordan Tyson with an early pick. I believe it was 6. Maybe I am off on that.
8 or 9, I think. Yeah,
8 or 9. Okay. Yeah, so they've added what could potentially be debatably the best talented wide receiver in the draft. And, then you've also still got the folks who were there, and Jalen Polk added, Juwan Johnson and Noah Fant at the tight end. I'm looking at this offense, and I'm looking at it very favorably right now, because I think last year was a particularly bad year for the Saints, and yet they still overperformed for what was expected. Kellen Moore is an offensive guy who's had a lot of really good offenses in the past. And me and Willie have talked a lot of time about him having a long leash. And I think this is where he has to start showing improvement. Not a ton. I don't think he has to be like Super Bowl contenders this year, but he has to show some improvement. And I think he will.
I did too. I had a lot of faith in him as a hire. I didn't have a lot of faith in the Saints last year as a team with, their 20-year plus, I think, GM Mickey Loomis. They're not making a lot of changes, but we really did see the Saints kind of switch things up this past offseason in comparison to other years, like, drafting Jordan Tyson and, making some big free agent signings we'll talk about in the running game in a second. And, like really committing to Tyler Shook, not having it be like, okay, well, we saw some stuff, but we're still going to bring in a veteran to compete because we don't really know for sure. Like, obviously Spencer Rattler's still on this team for now, but they absolutely committed to Shook at the end of last year. And they're really building around him. I mean, drafting a receiver in the top 10, Tyson is a risky pick based on injury history, but he has a lot of upside. But the fact that they took a receiver and focused on the offense with their top 10 pick really suggests that it's about building around Shook. There's really no question that he is the, unmistaken starter this year, it's just cool.
Yeah. And you know more about them as college players, but Jordan Tyson feels pretty solidly in like the Mike Williams sort of camp compared to Chris Olave. So it does feel like he's starting to set up his offense the same way he's had it in the past. And all of the offenses that Kellen Moore has had in the past, he's had 2 really good receivers, and they're playing different roles. One's more of a possession/route runner. One was a more physical jump ball guy. They've really worked, and both those players have been good for fantasy. So the wide receivers, Chris Olave had a great year last year. Like
I did not predict it. I thought he was going to be in concussion purgatory, but he really did prove it, and he looked really, really good. That was one of my worst takes last year.
So this offense, I'm excited for it. I think that you're going to have maybe some hype on this offense, but so players will go a little bit earlier than I want them to, but I don't think it's going to be over the top. I don't think we're going to see anyone threatening for the top 3 rounds in this offense. There's a chance that Chris Olave is right around there, but also like people have been burned by him so many times that I think there's really value on the Saints to be had.
There is, and you don't want to put a label on anything, but this on paper, this team does have that really big breakout potential, like we saw with the Colts last year, maybe more sustained throughout the year. But like they are that kind of team that people were writing off that have made a lot of good moves. And I do want to mention with the passing game in general, something I don't really ever talk about on the show, but I am going to break a little rule here and mention it. It's about the Vegas odds. And Tyler Shuck is currently set at 3,600 passing yards, which is around the same, if not more, than other QBs like Baker Mayfield and Jordan Love. Now, you can make an argument like a bad offense is going to pass a lot. So in passing attempts might have some weight there. But 3,600 yards is a lot for a line for a quarterback who is relatively unproven and hasn't shown a lot of elite traits. Like if Tyler Shuck actually passes for 3,600 yards this year, that means the Saints are going at like at least 8 or 9 wins. Like, the defense can carry them enough under Brandon Staley. Like that's a solid line for Vegas and insiders to be looking at. So
I want to talk about this because it's one of the funnier stats for teams from last year. The Saints shockingly had over 4,000 team passing yards last year.
as a team,
They were top 10 in total passing yards. But here's where it gets bad. They're bottom 5 in passing touchdowns. This is the Derek Carr effect without Derek Carr even playing last year. They also were tied for the second worst rushing touchdown total. So like if you can see like potential for, I don't know how it works team wise with positive regression, right? But like it feels like there's definitely room there because if they can get this many yards, they're clearly not a terrible offense. They just might have been terrible in the red zone. And adding someone like Jordan Tyson may change things up significantly for them. Adding someone like Travis Etienne may change things up significantly for them because last year they didn't really have a running game.
No. I mean Kamara, and who was the other guy last year? I'm actually blinking on who their big guy was.
Devin Neal. Sometimes
for a couple of games at least. I mean, he was the guy. Yeah.
There was the guy who Dennis Allen hated. That's not fair that that's the way I know him. That sucks.
Oh, the guy he got injured a lot.
Yeah, hammy guy. That sucks. I'm sorry, guys. But yeah. So I think that there's like a lot of room for improvement on this team. Now, here is interesting, I think, question with the team that we saw have just zero running success last year. Do you think that Travis Etienne is the answer to their running game? He has a perfect name for a New Orleans team. Etienne is just the exact right name you want for Louisiana. But can he now bring the swamp into the green zone? Oh, dang it. I almost had it, man. Into the end zone.
I'm going to go on record May 27th here. There's moving parts, but I'm going to go on record and say that I'm going to be overdrafting Etienne this year because, looking at his season 2 years ago in Jacksonville, when the Jags went 4-13, he did not have a good season. If you take that 2024 season out of his, history, he'd be looked at as one of the best running backs in the NFL, I think, at least in terms of fantasy. He had a really great year last year, albeit on the Jags, who were a really great offensive team. But he's coming into a team where Kellen Moore, in his first ever opportunity as a head coach, has a viable starting running back that is reliable, and they signed him to a 4-year deal. And I really think that Etienne, he's not going to be Saquon here, but I really do think that Etienne's skill set of, not only being a running back in his prime and a Kellen Moore offense, but the amount of times we saw Shuck check down last year and how good and versatile Etienne is as a pass catcher, like, I'm going on record in May, so things will change, but I could really see him being a top 5 finish at the running back position next year. I really do think, and that's less so just pure faith in the Saints offense or a team as a whole, and really just faith in Etienne and how this team looks at him and how they want to use him. I think he could be really, really, really good this year.
I love the take. I'm willing to go there. I'm not there yet, but I am willing to go there because I like this idea. And Travis Etienne is very skilled. I mean, his down year 2 years ago was also the down year of a team that with Doug Peterson was looking to be better and they just weren't, right? So like it was a really bad year for the Jags in total. And then last year we see him come back to life, really. And so he goes to the Saints. And as you were saying, he has a new lease of life now. If he comes out and he shows out, New Orleans is going to love him.
Yeah.
He's going to be their dude. So I like this. I'm not quite there on top 5 guess yet, but I could see top 10 easy. And that's the same with Kamara. What's Kamara going to do here, right? Kamara's already looked pretty washed. Now there was rumors that they were saving him for next season at the end of the last, but you don't want that rumor in your NFL career. He's old. He can catch the ball still pretty well, but like, is he going to threaten at all or take any of this work in a significant manner?
I don't think so. And I mean, I think if anything, he helps ETN and keeps him fresh because we saw ETN compete last year for touches with the
Tootin.
Tootin, who is now the de facto RB1 on the Jaguars. And we saw him with Tank Bigsby for part of the year last year. We saw him with LaQuint Allen, who was another rookie that showed, some flashes. Like, I think that ETN's going into a backfield with less competition. And, Kamara can be there to help keep him fresh. Like, if ETN's playing 8 snaps and Kamara's playing 2 or 3, each quarter or whatever, that's still pretty dang good. I think that ratio is how I see it breaking down. And that's enough for ETN to, I think, really deliver.
Yep. So Kamara, and this is without context of the other people's ADP, right? But like, if you were looking at a draft board right now, where would you guess he's going to go?
Kamara?
Yeah.
I'm pulling up here. I'm looking at the ADP for ETN, and this, again, of course, is in May. It looks like a lot of teams have him going in like the 40 range, which would be like a 4th round pick. And I can say already, I think it's going to go up, but I would absolutely smash ETN in the 4th round or even late 3rd at this point. I think that, at least on paper, he seems like a player that could be like, I'd feel comfortable as my RB1 potentially. I haven't found Kamara here yet, but if I recall, he was going like in the 7th, 8th, 9th round, maybe last year, maybe a little bit higher than that in some leagues, but I really don't think Kamara is going to be a player that's drafted in the single digits in any league this year.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. He burned teams pretty bad last year.
Yeah.
So okay, I'm looking at the Saints. That's basically it. There's not really a lot of other changes that are really significant to this team. They've got the same. I just think they're going to be better this year. I liked what I saw. I think Tyler Shook, he came in and he was an older rookie, so it makes sense that he looked good. I think that he doesn't have like as high a ceiling necessarily as a lot of other quarterbacks, but I think serviceable is better than they've had for a while.
I don't think he's really one to target in drafts, but having said that, like especially if you're in a 2 QB leagues, QB Superflex, and he's sitting there in the late rounds to take, like, I think he has as much upside this year. And again, this is not a 1-to-1 and not disrespect, but I think he has as much upside as like a Bryce Young because he's got a really strong offense. He's a passing quarterback primarily, but he does get a lot of rushing touchdowns too, and that definitely boons his upside. So, maybe he is worth considering drafting this year, but I wouldn't like get excited about him as my QB1. But there's breakout potential.
He feels like to me right now like the bye week fill-in that ends up playing a big part of your team because your quarterback 1 failed.
Yeah, that's a good way to. It reminds me a little bit. Like I had Sam Darnold 2 years ago on the Vikings, and I picked him up, and I was like, oh, he actually ended up starting most of my season.
Yeah, exactly what. Yeah, I could see him being that way again this year. Now, there are worse quarterbacks to me to take a chance on than a second-year quarterback. If you want to go for someone to break out and he's like on your bench, I don't love having quarterbacks on my bench to start the season. But if there was one, he seems like there's a candidate there. And I don't think that his price will get overblown like a lot of them do because the rushing upside isn't the exact same. It's not like, wow, it's just good.
It's good. Yeah, he inflated a little bit last year because of his rushing touchdowns, and I expect that to dip with Tyson in the end zone and ETN. I do want to ask real quick, Nick. So, not looking at their ADP currently, but going into drafts, you have more of like a preference on taking Olave a little bit early or like waiting a few rounds to go for Tyson, or are they kind of just like 1A 1B for you?
They're pretty close to 1A 1B for me, so which means I would likely wait for Tyson if he's going a few rounds lower. With that said, a lot of this is still baked into the concussion scare for me, and I that might be, I might have different opinions later on as I've thought about it more. But Olave got his head rocked so many times that it feels like just one more bad one and he's out for half the season. Jordan Tyson also has injury concerns that are pretty significant, so it's not without saying. I think that Jordan Tyson, where he gets me, is I think the touchdowns are going to be there for him. Whereas Olave is going to be hit or miss. Jordan Tyson's the big body dude who can get that jump ball in the end zone.
We saw a lot of great moments from Olave last year because of him getting like 10 receptions a game. And that's, even if the offense improves, that's going to dip. That efficiency is not going to be there. But I agree. I think that Olave, like, if he stays healthy, I think his floor is still where he was a couple of years ago with the ghost of Derek Carr. Like he's proven himself to be a legit NFL wide receiver.
Yeah, I don't think you have to feel bad about having him on your team anymore. And what I guess the real thought I was having is that I think Jordan Tyson, he's going to steal a lot from Juwan Johnson, who actually ended up having a fairly good season last year. So what I think is going to happen is you're going to see Jordan Tyson come in and get his own command share and also take over a lot of those targets that Juwan Johnson was getting as a big body.
Yeah.
And there was a good amount of those targets to go around. And he's just a better receiver than Juwan Johnson. No offense to Juwan.
Take this with a grain of salt, and this is May, but right now on Fantasy Pros, the average ADP for Olave is wide receiver 11, and the average ADP for Tyson is wide receiver 37, around the Alec Pierce, Jacoby Myers range. That will go up.
Yeah, it has to. There's no chance it doesn't. He's a top 10 drafted wide receiver.
Yeah, but it's interesting. There is still a clear gap there, and I think that gap will remain with Olave on top regardless for the rest of the year. And before we move on, I do want to just give a quick shout out to their third round tight end pick, Oscar Delp out of Georgia. I just want to shout him out because I talked about on the draft reaction pod about all these blocking tight ends that were drafted and how it's very chaotic and how like fading rookie tight ends is the way to go this year. I do want to mention Delp, not just on his role on this team is, maybe coming in as tight end 1 over Johnson, but because Delp is a more pass catching tight end as his prototype. So he wasn't drafted as a blocking tight end. He was drafted, it looks like, to replace or, succeed Juwan Johnson. So Oscar Delp, if you really want to draft a rookie tight end this year, you don't get the Jets guy, Sadiq, or
Sadiq, yeah.
Or Stowers and the Eagles. I think like Delp is like right around like my tight end 3 range, one of the few draftable rookies this year.
I was feeling it until I saw they added Noah Fant, and Noah Fant is like, he's just annoying enough to scare me off the tight ends. You know what I mean? Not that Noah Fant is going to ever be a startable position, but he's like okay enough that they'll give him enough targets to just ruin it for everybody else.
Yeah, that's fair. Delp is drafted, would be drafted as like your late round gem. He's not drafted to play really. He's just a dart throw. But yeah.
Fair. Okay, so let's move on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So last year they finished 8-9, and as I said earlier, they managed to miss the playoffs after starting off as what looked like one of the best teams in the NFL. You are bringing back Todd Bowles. They allowed him to come back. You do have Zach Robinson as a new offensive coordinator. Now, Zach Robinson came over from the Falcons, which were, that's definitely a good choice to hire him. Another NFC South failure. He was on the Rams before that, though, and that does get you leash and leeway for every team in the league at this point. And the defensive coordinator is still Todd Bowles. They don't have another one listed.
It's terrible. I can't believe he's back. And secondly, like, Robinson, like, he comes from the Rams. He's got that McVay clout. But, geez, like, the Falcons offense, like, okay, yeah, in a vacuum, like, we saw Bijan was incredible last year. They didn't have great quarterback play, but there were some games where the Falcons shouldn't have lost, and a lot of that was on the offensive play calling. So go back and watch some of their close games, and you can tell me if it's like Cousins not clicking. Sometimes it was. He threw an interception in the end zone, or was it the offensive play calling? And it really looked like it was a lot of the time. So this is a bad hire. I'm sorry.
It's hard for me because what is going to inspire Baker Mayfield this year? Because I think what we saw was the difference with the Falcons and their what we saw with the difference between the Buccaneers and their start of the season versus the end of the season was that Baker Mayfield was healthy and playing very confident. And at the end of the season, I don't know if it was injuries or what, but he was playing very differently. He was overthrowing everybody constantly. You went from Tez Johnson showing up and having an amazing season to nobody doing well basically at all because Baker couldn't hit anyone.
Yeah.
This team lost Mike Evans, which crazy. Think about a Buccaneers team without Mike Evans. It's been how many years?
Yeah.
No, not even the same team.
No.
But they did add Kenneth Gainwell, so that's good. That Kenneth Gainwell is coming in as maybe the RB2 to start the year, but maybe the RB1 because Bucky Irving was given a time frame today to return from a shoulder surgery of either the start of camp or the fall.
The fall. That's just very vague.
Todd Bowles stuff going on here now. So
Mind you, week 1 isn't still technically in the summertime too. So
yeah. But if it's the fall, that's bad news for everybody. So this team clearly has value on it. You have Emeka Egbuka. You have Chris Godwin. You have Tez Johnson, which is still maybe hopeful. You have Ted Hurst. And then you've got Kate Otten. Jalen McMillan, which I think is a person for some people. He's a real reach for me almost in any sort of redraft. Like, he scares me a bit.
I'd like him if Ibuka and Tez Johnson and Ted Hurst went here, because his rookie year was pretty dang solid. But they just have added 3 new guys since he missed all of last year of injury. So,
So my question to you, is there anything that would give you an indication that things are going to be better than they were at the end of last year? Because it went from great, Emeka Egbuka is just the star receiver in this league, to completely middling to disappearing act. Like, there was, if you were relying on a buck at the end of the season last year, you did poorly at the end. And he did amazing at the beginning. So, like, there's this weird thing where I'm worried about everyone being overvalued.
it really depends on where the draft swings in terms of, like, are we going to go with recency bias, or are we going to go with overhyping or underhyping names? Because if it's recency bias, some of these guys could really fall. If it's just looking at it and how it was to start the year, slightly new regime with a new OC, then some players are going to get, overdrafted. Who was their offensive coordinator last year, and where did he go?
Give me a second to look that up.
Okay. Because I'm just wondering, I can't recall if it was a firing. And again, I don't trust Todd Bowles' judgment. I want to clarify that. But if it was a firing, then in a sense, you can make an argument that the reason that they collapsed last year was because their offensive coordinator couldn't get it together. They brought in a new guy. If he just left, then what's the solution here?
It was Josh Grizzard, and he was fired.
Okay.
Yeah.
So at least this regime at least somewhat places the blame on the offensive coordinator. Because if you look at, post week 8, you look around then, like, no one was talking about the OC getting fired. No one was like, if he wasn't there next year, maybe he was a head coach. Like, we've seen this Bucks OC to head coach pipeline happen at least once or twice already. So clearly there's some blame there. And there's a lot of questions for me more than answers with these players. And there's some guys that maybe I'm singling out as, like, I want to give them the benefit of a doubt and get excited. I think the name that comes to mind is Ibuka. And I think you might feel the same.
A little bit. Like, I want to see him succeed again. So there's the optimism of it, because that means good things for the offense. But I'm so worried about where he's going to get drafted.
Yeah. Let's see where he's at right now.
Yeah, because I could see him being, because of how hot he started last year, I could see that being all that people remember, and he could be going in, like, the first 2 to 3 rounds. That's just too early for me right now with this team.
Right now, it looks like he's going as the wide receiver 24, right ahead of Mike Evans on the Niners.
Okay. So that feels okay. I would absolutely be in on him. Now, I wonder where Chris Godwin's going, because Chris Godwin feels like there's potential value there, because he had basically a very, he was almost like a lost year. Like, he did play, but it was just kind of, didn't really amount to much. And I could see Chris Godwin coming back and having a pretty solid year this year.
He seems to be the guy that when you're hyping him up, maybe he disappoints, but, like, when you're counting him out, he does come back and, like, show up. Like, Chris Godwin 2 years ago was one of the best receivers in fantasy, and that was before Ibuka, but when Evans was still there in his prime, getting 1,000 yards. So yeah, Godwin is an interesting one. Obviously, there's chemistry there with Baker Mayfield, chemistry with the team. He is kind of like that, OG leader of the offense now, just based on seniority alone.
A lot of this is also, to me, and the reason why I'm hesitant with a lot of this, I want to know what's up with Bucky Irving, right? Because I think this team, is identity, could be a running team this year if Bucky Irving is healthy and ready to go, because they've added Kenneth Gainwell. They still have Sean Tucker, and that's a pretty good core. I mean, as much as I hate Arthur Smith, you saw how he used Kenneth Gainwell. That was an effective duo with 2 running backs that could run and catch. That's what this would be here. Now,
I was going to say, in theory, he's an upgrade over Rashad White from last year, at least, too.
yeah. And so I'm really curious because if Bucky Irving is healthy, I think the pass catchers being lower is where they probably should be, because I think they're going to try to lean heavier on the run, because the run game last year was just not very good. But Bucky Irving in health has been such an issue that I don't want to really guess one way or the other with this guy. Gosh.
The Bucks are such a, I mean, again, about Bowles, I think has been there most of this tenure of these stats, but like, so they were dead last in rushing in the 2022-2023 season. 2024, they shot up to like, I want to say top 5 when Irving was healthy the whole year. He had a breakout. Rashad White was still good. I don't know where, let me see. I'm going to look up where they finished last year. And this is, obviously with Bucky Irving being hurt most of the year.
They were in the bottom half in both rushing yards and touchdowns last year. Like, they weren't at bottom 5, but they were pretty bad.
So they say they went from terrible to really, really good to pretty dang bad. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of volatility there.
And to me, it's like if Bucky Irving starts the season and he stays healthy the whole season, I think the pass catchers going in mid rounds, it can still provide good value. I don't think they'll be superstars per se. But if Bucky Irving is hurt, then one of Chris Godwin or Emeka Egbuka is going to just get so much volume that you're going to love it. And I would guess on Chris Godwin out of the two of those for volume. Yeah. So, like, if Bucky's hurt, I'm in on Chris Godwin more. And if Bucky's healthy, I'm in on Emeka more.
I don't want to make predictions, but, like, based on what they've said and, like, just the unknown of this running game, like, I'm going to lean towards Bucky not being a super exciting player this year. And most likely one that's going to be overdrafted relative to where there's a nightmare scenario with Bucky, I think, based on where you take him. He might not play this year. He might not be healthy. And I do like the upgrade of Kenneth Gainwell. And I think Sean Tucker's shown a lot. He had that amazing game against Buffalo, but I'm pretty turned off by this run game right now in terms of draft.
I will provide the foil to that in just one way, that he reminds me a lot about how I felt about Devon Achane at the start of last offseason. I felt very similarly out on him, and Achane just tore it up last year. Had an amazing season against all odds.
If we get some news in July, August that Bucky's ready to go week 1, and they can say that confidently, and we see him practicing, I'm going to get excited about him in this run game more. But if there's still question marks when your drafts come around, obviously ADP will reflect this, but I don't know.
This is fair. Let me have the question for you that I think matters the most with this team. And it's hard to talk about it because we talk about fantasy football, and fantasy football is just very offense oriented. The Bucks have had a bad defense, just bad defense. It's been awful for a while. Todd Bowles, as a head coach, is supposed to be, in theory, in ideology, ideals, all of the I's, he is supposed to be a defensive coach. Mm-hmm. And the defense has been bad his whole entire tenure, essentially. I might be hyperbolizing. There might have been a year or two where they were good. But he is still the defensive coordinator going this year, which means he called his own number and said, I can prove that I can do this. Because last year what we heard was someone needs to take play calling duties from him for the defense. Mm-hmm. Someone needs to take it over from me. He said, you think someone needs to take play calling duties over for me? I'm going to fire my offensive coordinator, which is a choice. It's not the one I would make, but it was a choice. So here he is, Willie, because draft. Did the Bucks do anything to significantly address their defense that should, in theory, once again, make it better?
Well, so there was a lot of injuries on defense last year. Kalijah Cansey, who was a first-round DT a couple years ago, did not play. David Walker was a rookie. He was injured the whole year. I think Chris Braswell was banged up. I think maybe Vita Vea missed some time. I don't recall for sure. But Benjamin Morrison was a never highly touted rookie pick last year, but it barely played, missed some games. So there's a lot of injuries. So there's a benefit of a doubt there. In terms of a draft this year, they couldn't have done much better on defense. I think adding pieces. I think Ruben Bain was a great value in the first round. They got another like solid rookie corner. I forget his name. It's slipping my mind in like the second or third round. So if the defensive players that were, injured last year are healthy and the draft picks hit, like the defense could take a step up. I just think that Bowles has had 4 years to prove that he's a competent defensive coordinator, and we've not seen this competent defense under his tenure. It's been average.
Really bad sometimes, average a lot of
Yeah.
it. Yeah, it was Keontae Scott is the guy you're thinking of.
Yeah, out of Miami. Yeah.
So to me, that's the question I need to ask myself about this team, because if the defense is better, then like I said, I think they're going to lean on that run game. And if this is also, part of this needs to be Bucky needs to be healthy, because that's what we haven't really seen from this team to maybe get them over the top of this middle out they've been doing. If the defense isn't better, all bets are out, and Todd Bowles has to be gone by week 6 or 7.
If not, I'm bringing him back was certainly a choice.
letting him hire the offensive coordinator from the other canned coach, Raheem Morris's Falcons, another choice. Just weird choices all around. This is a team that I don't personally like. Listen to what I said about the players. This team, I don't have a lot of hopes for next season and like turning around things. I think they're going to get worse, and it's just going to be a lost season overall.
It seems like, if they get better, that really doesn't mean much in terms of like, if they get slightly better than last year, because I think the defense will be slightly better. The offense is kind of a wash because, you lose Mike Evans and Bucky's uncertain. So even if everything is slightly better, it's still a 9-8 season. And that's not great. I will say though, and I think this probably will change too. I'm going to stop saying that. Baker Mayfield's going as a low end QB2. And I do like him as someone who really liked him last year and was proved to be correct the first half of the season. I think that depending on where he goes, I think Baker Mayfield is your starting quarterback. You could really do worse. I think that, he might not have the upside like he did going into last year, but I would not be surprised at all if he finishes as a, QB 12, 13, 14. And that's
something happened midway through the season with Baker. He was a completely different player. So if he can come back and show at the beginning of what he had at the beginning of last year, even like 80% of that, he's going to be a good pick for a quarterback. And I mean, my idea is take him and then just be willing to get off of him, especially if he's cheap.
Yeah. I mean, I like, going Baker if you can get him in like the 9th round and then, taking a shot on Chuck. Like that's a great quarterback strategy, I think, because you have that mix of like risk and reward. I think you really can't go wrong. Yeah.
Okay, let's get off of this team because they fill me with regret of talking about them like their season was regretting, and like they'll regret not firing Todd Bowles at the end of the season. I'm sure that his name's Todd Bowles. I know that. I'm sorry. I keep calling him Todd Bowles because there's a joke that I had written in here that I didn't read, but you can go ahead and guess what it is. So let's talk about the Carolina Panthers now. That's fun. This is a good one. They went 8-9, but as opposed to being really depressed about it, they got to make the playoffs when they went 8-9. They were the ultimate winners of the NFC South. Just whoever can make it past the finish line gets in. And it's a team you can hate right now. Like they showed out and they didn't necessarily do great, but they did better than they had for a while. We have Bryce Young as a young quarterback who could still potentially be something in this league. We have Chuba Hubbard. We have Jonathan Brooks, who is back. Who knows what's going to happen with Jonathan Brooks? And then, you have some additions in more than a Freeling, Monroe Freeling, and Chris Brazel, which every time I see his name and it's spelled with 2 Z's like that, it makes me worried I'm reading something from a different website. But they lost Rico Dowdle, who was a spark plug for them. But other than that, I mean, the team is relatively the same. Head coach still Dave Canales. OC still Brad Idzik. They didn't lose their defensive coordinator, Giro Avero. He came back.
That's big. That was a big keep.
It was. And so they've added an offensive tackle. I'm totally. Did I already say it? Was it Freeling?
Monroe, yeah. First round rookie left tackle.
This is my good on writing down his nickname and not writing down his position. But I have a question for you, Willie.
Yeah.
And you're going to hate this question because it has nothing to do with fantasy football. How come when I read about Monroe Freeling online, he's called a hog molly?
That is, I'm spitballing here. I think there was some elite offensive line, either college or maybe it was like in the 70s or 80s. That was like one of the best offensive lines in the game. And they were like the O-line coach nicknamed the Hog Mollies, or there's something like that. Or maybe it's like an old college like nickname for great offensive line. It's basically like it kind of sounds. It is what it sounds like. It's a hog molly. It's like a big hog, and he's tough, but also he's molly, so he's kind of silly and likable. And Monroe Freeling has a mullet, and he just seems like a tough guy that's kind of silly, and that's a hog molly.
I couldn't figure that out because like I'm looking up all these Southern teams, right? And you'd think that there would be nicknames for all of them, but no, it's just Carolina that's throwing out these nicknames at me. They're calling this dude a hog molly, and I'm just reading some like what, like, okay. First, please, I just want to stop calling players livestock.
Fair.
But neither here nor there. I won't get on my soapbox on that. It's not that interesting. But I did look it up. Hog mollies is a popular slang term used in American football to describe massive, heavy-set offensive linemen who dominate in the trenches. I'm adding the bold words here. That's not really bold. This is just AI. It gained widespread fame thanks to former NFL executive Dave Gettleman, who I believe he has a history with Carolina. Just funny, you know. Anyway, neither here nor there. So let's look at Carolina.
I do want to add though, just to summarize all that, there's a scene in Blades of Glory, and of course the classic Kanye Jay-Z song. Like, what does that mean? Nobody knows what it means, but it gets the people going. It's provocative. That's what a hog molly is.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't stop looking it up because I'm like, are you calling him a hog molly? I get the idea. That's like it's a big pig, but like, how come I don't see it from every other team? How come it is just Carolina that's giving me these weird nicknames? They got their own flair there, you know. Okay, so let's talk about them last year. So you have Teteroa McMillan. He had what I would call a pretty darn good rookie year. Brazel, who we mentioned, used to play with Bryce Young, so there's familiarity there. And then Jalen Coker hopefully will start the year off healthy and stay on the team the whole time. So starting with just the pass catching trio on this team, I think there's a lot of potential here. But my question is, Teteroa, I think, is a lock for being a good fantasy player if he stays healthy. Jalen Coker, is this someone we can have some form of excitement for again going into year 3 with this guy?
I mean, I'm looking at his ADP right now. He's going around this is actually kind of sad for him, but he's going around the same range as Matthew Golden. But honestly, like Coker had some blow up games last year, but this is a guy who was an undrafted rookie out of Holy Cross University 2 years ago. And he's done nothing but prove himself in the NFL. And I think that looking at this depth chart, the fact that he's placed ahead of Xavier Legette, maybe that's just a formality with position and X versus Z, but he's a starting wide receiver going into the year. And I think that Coker, you know, if he's actually going pretty late in drafts, like, you know, Bryce Young's development notwithstanding, like Coker's been pretty solid. You know, you could do worse as your wide receiver 4. That's for sure on your team.
Yeah, I bring him up because I kind of like where he's at right here. Because I mean, so they added John Mechie, who had like little flashes with the Texans, and then Chris Brazel, who could be something. I don't know that I'm like overly excited about Brazel right now, but Jalen Coker is that guy who, when they went to him, and I believe they went to him in the playoff game, if I'm right, like he ended up being like their de facto wide receiver 1 because Tet was covered pretty well.
Who were they playing in that game? Was it the Seahawks or the Rams?
Rams. It was the Rams. Yeah. So I do believe that's what happened. And if it wasn't, then it was one of their last season games. But watching Coker, he had a great game. He had a phenomenal game. He showed up when they called on him.
Coker in the wild card had 9 receptions for 134 yards and a touchdown.
Yeah, I was gonna say I saw that game, this last game, and that maybe this is a little bit of recency bias, but it's also the fact that Coker is someone who has had this hype around him on the team. I think he could really step in that wide receiver 2 role. So immediately, maybe this is too deep to start off with on the team, but that's my sleeper right there is Jalen Coker. Go get this guy late, like throw him on your team at the back end.
Yeah, there's nothing to not like about him. I mean, like, even if he's like doesn't have big games every week and he puts up some stinkers, like if you're drafting him, he's going to be on your bench, and he's a player that, like, if he's on your bench, there's some upside there. Like if, you know, God forbid T-Mac goes down, like Coker, like we saw in the wildcard game, stepped up to be the wide receiver 1 and had a big game. So nothing to hate.
Now, Teteroa, what's the earliest you'd consider drafting him?
Personally, I think that it really depends on how much faith I have in this Panthers team. And honestly, like, my opinion's still out on Bryce Young. I mean, I love Bryce Young. He's the reason the Bears have Caleb Williams. So I'm always going to love Bryce Young. I think that a lot of my faith on the Panthers right now is the defense. I think they had some great additions there. I really like their DC. Um, and I think the Panthers could be really good this year. I think that regardless, like I said, yeah, Bryce Young, I think that T-Mac had a great year last year. I mean, you didn't really see it until the second half. He didn't like blow you away in fantasy, but he had a great year from a real life perspective. I mean, obviously, offensive rookie of the year. And there's nothing about his skill set or this team that makes me say like, oh, well, he's solid, but he's not going to like become like a wide receiver one in fantasy, because he absolutely could. And I think that third round for T-Mac might sound a little bit rich, but if he's my wide receiver one and I have drafted other players ahead of him that I feel really good about, like I'm not, if he's my wide receiver one going into the year, I'm not going to be upset about that.
Fair. Okay. I like it. He's one of those players that, again, I'm just kind of repeating you at this point. Like if he's my wide receiver one, if I have two strong running backs or like maybe a really strong tight end and a running back, I think the potential's there. It's a little scary, but also he's so sure. Like if he gets volume, he's going to capitalize on it.
But here's my question. I was going to say, how could he get worse? Like, is he going to actually regress from last year? We see it sometimes, but there's nothing on this team of how it changed or how he is as a player that suggests he's going to finish worse than he did last year.
No, and if we can have like Jalen Coker or even Xavier Legette just show something competent on the other side from him, that might help him out a lot with the coverage.
Yeah, he's going to be the focal point, but like, yeah, if he can have other players step up, which I really think they could. I think the sky really is the limit of him. I would pump the brakes on getting super excited about him and the Panthers, but like, if again, similar to ETN on the Saints, but like if you told me he finished as a top 5 wide receiver this coming year, I wouldn't be like, oh wow,
Mm-hmm. Now the running backs, you've got Chuba Hubbard. We've kind of seen him. You know what to expect. There's potential for some upside there, but there's also potential for him to middle out. But you'll have Jonathan Brooks, who right now is the RB2 on this team, and they didn't seem to go add anyone else. Jonathan Brooks was a high draft pick who had injury history, and he injured himself again almost immediately when returning. However, do you think that there's a world in which Jonathan Brooks ends up as a fantasy relevant player this year?
From a talent perspective, injury notwithstanding, I think absolutely. He was the highest drafted running back 2 years ago. So think about like, we had Jeremiah Love, Van Ashton-Genty, Jonathan Brooks. Like he was drafted in the early second round 2 years ago. The injury, it does scare me. There's a risk baked in here. And I think that you could look at it from two ways. One, the fact that the Panthers let go of Rico Dowdle either suggests that they have a lot of confidence in Chuba Hubbard being their RB1, or they have a lot of confidence in Jonathan Brooks being healthy. And one of those two things has to be true for them to let Dowdle go and not draft another running back. So I think that, my gut feeling says that Brooks is somebody to look at because he's going to go extremely late if drafted at all, just because we've never seen him. And depending on where Hubbard goes, he's somebody to look at as well. But I think that Brooks, from just a player perspective, he has all the upside in the world.
Yeah, and maybe I'm like a fool for these like reclamation projects, right? But I like Brooks as a sleeper again. So I've got two sleepers on this team. Coker and Brooks, if they're going late, are two players that I'd love to add on to my teams. Now, Hubbard, I mean, like for me, it just depends on his health, right? Like last year, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't particularly good, and then he got injured. And then Rico Dowdle came out and made it look like, anyone could run behind that line. They've made the offensive line better. So Hubbard has this like sneaky potential to be top 10 in my opinion, but it doesn't feel great. So he feels like he's going to be one of those dead zone running backs that you're going to just have to make a gut choice on.
If he ends up having a good season, like if he's your flex, like that's solid. I mean, and I'm glad you mentioned the offensive line because it was pretty solid last year and it only got better. Not only did they draft Monroe Freeling, who may sit this year, but they also added Rasheed Walker, who was the Packers' starting left tackle for most of last year. They got him in free agency. And Ikem Ekwonu he tore his patellar tendon in that Rams wildcard game. So it's going to be between Rasheed Walker and Freeling for that left tackle spot. And then, they still have a solid interior as well. So this is a top 10 O-line, I think, on paper in the league. So that really just benefits the whole offense,
It really does. I mean, we've talked about it. I know I've mentioned over and over again how offensive line is really the only part of any of these teams that matters. If you do believe, like Willie's saying right here, that this is a top 10 O-line, draft one of these guys early. Draft Hubbard or draft Tedoroa. Draft both maybe, but I don't go crazy. Don't listen to that. This is my first episode of the season. Don't draft both just on what I said right there. But buy in. If you think that offensive line is going to get better, buy in that they'll also get better as players, because that's kind of how this works. Once the plays can actually develop, you suddenly see players look a lot better than they did when the plays are breaking down in 2 seconds.
Exactly. And the competition between Dottle and Hubbard was a bit of a nightmare at times, depending on who you're starting. But Brooks doesn't provide. He provides upside, but he doesn't provide the same level of immediate backfield split competition with Hubbard. So there's something to like there. And I do want to just shout out the defense real quick, because it was, pretty solid last year. It helped them get to the playoffs. And they signed Devin Lloyd, who was a monster on the Jaguars last year, one of the best defensive players in football. They signed Jalen Phillips from the Eagles. He was a big boost to the Eagles defense down the stretch after they traded for him. J.C. Horn's one of the best corners in the league. We saw a lot of good things from Nick Scorton last year, who was a rookie. And I believe that Derek Brown was injured a lot of last year, and he's one of the best defensive tackles in the game, and he's back.
So check that out, and also add in the fact that last year they had the second least rushing touchdowns, or they're tied with a few other teams for the second least rushing touchdowns. But they were mid in the league in terms of rushing yards. There's some positive regression there. So I might be in the middle of talking myself more into Hubbard, especially if he's in round 4, round 5. RB2 Chuba might just be a hit.
Chuba's going RB27 right now.
Oh, yeah. So maybe 5 or 6 even then. In that case, I'm feeling pretty. Chuba's rising up my ranks right this second in my mind. So
I like it.
So the NFC South, now that we've talked about them, they do have a schedule where they go against the AFC North. So that's, teams that were formerly known for their defense that I don't know how their defenses are all looking right now. The Browns, the Bengals, the Ravens, Browns, Bengals, Ravens, Steelers. There we go. We got there. Yeah. Middle of the pack, but I can also see those guys coming back pretty strong year over year.
There's a lot of changes. It's when you look at everything overall, it's about the same as last year.
Mm-hmm. And then they get to go against the NFC North and one matching place AFC West team. So I think that it could be a difficult year for them, but also these defenses don't exactly scare me. So this feels like a pretty neutral schedule just in May.
Mm-hmm.
As far as players go. So this isn't like a huge boon or a huge negative.
And also remember they're getting to play against the NFC South 6 times, so that helps.
It does. Okay, way too early prediction, Willie. NFC South finishing.
All right, way too early. I'm feeling the Panthers to repeat. I think the Panthers maybe have the best defense in this division, and again, Bryce Young breaking out notwithstanding, that doesn't really matter as long as he stays where he's at. I still like this offense quite a bit, so I'm going to go Panthers. 2 and 3 is close for me. If I were to go with my gut, I would say Saints, but I do think that I have faith in Baker Mayfield to make it work, but I don't have faith in Balls. So actually, I'm going to say Saints and Bucks 2 and 3. I think they probably finish with around the same 9 and 8 record, but and then the Falcons, it's TBD, but I could see the Falcons finishing around 7 wins. I mean, they could break out, but I don't believe in Tua or Penix enough to predict them anywhere near the top. So I'm going Panthers number 1. That's my most confident pick here.
Okay, I'm going to go the opposite. Not the opposite, but I'm going to start off with, I'm going to say Saints win. I think the NFC South is one of those cursed divisions where they don't ever have repeats usually. And I think the Saints just come out and have, 1 win more. Panthers are my number 2 though. So it wouldn't be a shock if Panthers did win. Those are the 2 teams that I think are competing for it. And then after that, I have Falcons 3rd and Bucks 4th. I don't like the feel of this Bucks team right now. It feels like it ended on a really negative note. And I don't know that they have what it takes to turn that around.
Yeah, the only thing that gets me excited about the Bucks is just Baker Mayfield and what we've seen the past couple years, and maybe Ibuka breaking out, some defensive additions, but overall, when you look at these coaches and his staff, like Bowles stands out as the weakest. Obviously we haven't seen enough of the other three, but he still stands out as the weakest, and that's something in a division like this you kind of have to lean. But
yeah. Okay, so that was our NFC South deep dive division. I think, Willie, let's take like a 5-minute break and come back. Just restroom break, hit it up in the middle. We'll be back in 5 minutes talking about the NFC East.
that's it.
Get ready, William. I'm about to blow your mind. Welcome back to the Double Doinkers starring Nick Meyer and Willie J. If you're just joining us, we just broke down the NFC South. And now we're going to break down the NFC East and all it entails. So welcome back. So, after that quick break, we have to get into a division that always feels vaguely exciting, even if they're not necessarily that exciting. The NFC East, a division that, I don't know, they have the Cowboys, they have the Eagles, they have the Giants. They're kind of forced down our throat every year in a bunch of primetime games that we have to watch regardless of whether or not they're good. So there's always some fantasy relevant players on these teams. And I didn't even mention the Commanders. I don't really want to again. But Willie, because I had you looking at these guys, how about you lead us through the NFC East?
Yeah, let's hit it. We see some high highs and some low lows from the NFC East. I think that each and every year we can kind of count on a good offensive position, at least in the past few years, because we've seen the Cowboys, the Eagles, the Commanders a couple years ago, and some big fantasy studs. And I'm going to start off the NFC East with the losing team, I believe, in the division last year. That would be the New York Giants. So the New York Giants have had some pretty big switch ups. They, of course, went 4-13 last year, but they fired their head coach, Brian Daboll, midseason, and they brought in John Harbaugh, who you may know as the less handsome brother of the Harbaughs. But he was the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens the past 18 years.
See, I feel like that's true until Jim put on those glasses.
Oh,
the new version of the glasses.
The glasses is the only reason I was the joke. The reason he's a cute one. But they bring in Harbaugh, which, if they brought in any new head coach that had 18 years of experience, it would be pretty relevant. But the fact that Harbaugh is such a big culture setter, at least he was in Baltimore, and he just has a very strongly tied philosophy of defense and running the ball. So that's just probably the biggest offseason head coach hire, in my opinion. Of course, they also bring in offensive coordinator Matt Nagy. He's coming over from the Chiefs. That I have my feelings about that. And then they have Denard Wilson, defensive coordinator, who was on Harbaugh's staff with the Ravens last year. But Harbaugh is the de facto defensive guru for the Giants this year.
Yeah. So, I mean, can I just say having Matt Nagy from the Chiefs after all seasons, the one that happened last year with the Chiefs, way to make me just feel like less optimistic about this team immediately.
It's a tricky situation because they fired Daboll and they promoted their interim offensive coordinator, Mike Kafka. And of course, you're not going to really keep around a guy that you technically had as your head coach and then ask him to leave. But Kafka was pretty good last year. The Giants were not good. They were a disaster in a lot of ways. But we saw when the offense was healthy, it looked pretty awesome. So you really can't put any of the blame on the Giants' struggles last year on Kafka. I'm sure some games here and there maybe. But Nagy, I don't know. I don't know if maybe it's a personality clash with Harbaugh, but you feel like this would have been the most attractive OC opening in the league, or one of the most. So it's curious why they didn't try and go after maybe a Cliff Kingsbury or somebody like that who's still not currently doesn't have a position. It's an interesting choice.
I feel like with Harbaugh that there's there's a personality thing, right? But it's more so like a personality of wanting the control of the room.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
And maybe Nagy's he worked under Andy Reid. He's like, you know what? I don't care anymore. I got my stint with the Bears. I'll do whatever you want. Who cares? Let me stay here.
And it's attractive position because you have the players there that Nagy, unfortunately, is still one of those fringe possible future head coaching candidates. And if he looks great with the Giants, that's a boon for him for sure.
I'll also say this. I'm happy that he has a different offensive coordinator than he did last year, because originally it sounded like Todd Monken was going to come over with him. And then Monken ended up taking the Browns job. So we see him with Matt Nagy. And I would have been so worried about this team if you had just been, hey, let's turn this Jackson Dart into Lamar.
Yeah.
But neither here nor there. I don't know. this is a weird one because like this is a huge splash of head coach. So this is like a really big culture change, and yet I don't know how excited I'm feeling about it. I'm kind of like it's like warm milk, like it hasn't been sitting out for too long.
I mean, we saw the Ravens with Harbaugh and some, less ideal offensive coordinators over the years, like Greg Roman, and we still had a lot of fantasy relevance. So I think the Nagy's pick's just kind of a wash. I think this is Harbaugh's team, and Harbaugh is a coach that has won quite a bit. So he really, like, regardless of anything we talk about today, like everything really comes back to Harbaugh and what this team looks like and the upside it has under him. So having said that, we have Jackson Dart, Jackson 6, Jan 6, Jackson 6, returning as head coach or starting quarterback. We lost Russell Wilson. They lost Russell Wilson, but they have Jameis Winston back there as the backup quarterback. And I think given Dart's, injury history we saw in his rookie year, and how he kind of carries himself in the game, taking risky hits, that having a solid backup for Winston he's one of the best backup quarterbacks for fantasy, if not the best. So, if you're taking pieces of his passing game and worried about Dart's health, I wouldn't worry too much because Winston's still there. That's something to look forward to. Running backs, of course, we have Cam Scatabo coming off that really, really gnarly leg injury, but apparently it's healed and he's good to go. Tyrone Tracy, Devin Singletary coming back. No switch ups from last year. No big losses, or really no losses at all. No ads either. Wide receivers is where it gets interesting. We have, of course, Malik Neighbors coming back for what's basically his second year because he didn't play much last year. They lost Wan'Dale Robinson, who signed a big, huge deal with the Titans. And in terms of returning receivers, we have Darius Slayton and Jalen Hyatt coming back. And we got Darnell Mooney in free agency. We took Malachi Fields out of Notre Dame in the 3rd round. And then they also signed Calvin Austin. And the tight ends is where we see the biggest switch up, though. They lost Greg Dulrich and Daniel Bellinger to free agency. And they brought in Isaiah Likely from the Ravens. And of course, they still have Theo Johnson, who showed at least a couple of games last year that he was competent. So as much as the culture has changed under Harbaugh, there really hasn't been a big shakeup with the offense. They also lost Tommy DeVito and Russell Wilson, Wan'Dale Robinson. Really, that's the only significant changes, and that's really not much if you look at in comparison to other teams. So I'm curious, looking at this, how do we feel about, we can talk about all three at once, really. Dart, Neighbors, Scatabo. They're both have been very, very exciting in fantasy at times. Had some really incredible games, sky is the limit kind of upside. But all three of them are coming in with either lingering injuries or play styles that lead into potential injuries. So, we'll talk about them all, but who do you feel the safest? This isn't the best pick, but who do you feel the safest about drafting as a player in terms of injuries, not ADP, we're just safety? And who do you feel the most cautious about?
So the player I feel the safest taking is Jackson Dart. I really have a hard time failing to see how he returns value unless he's in the top like 3 rounds.
Mm-hmm.
He could be a quarterback 4, and I'd still feel pretty okay with taking him. He was just a producer, and based on some certain off the field things, that doesn't necessarily make me the happiest to say, but fantasy wise, truthfully, that's who would be most excited for on this team. Now, that's crazy because last year I was willing to take Malik Neighbors at the 6, like 1-6, very early. This year I'm a little bit more worried because of a few reasons. I think that he's going to have clashes with Harbaugh.
I could see that.
And for whatever that's worth, like Malik Neighbors is an amazing talent, but he's already just kind of, he's a wide receiver, an amazing talent wide receiver. We already know this archetype. They're divas, and he's showing to start being that. And also, MetLife doesn't have a very good history for lower leg injuries.
Yep.
It worries me. So Malik Neighbors is either going to be a phenomenal, amazing pick, like top 5 wide receiver, or he's going to get hurt again. I think there's no in between with that. And I'm so worried about him getting hurt again.
There's no clear call one way or the other that he's going to be ready to go week 1, which is kind of concerning because, he tore his ACL very early on in the season. I think it was the end of September. And if obviously it's still May, but if you're going into August, September, and you're 11 months out from an ACL tear in the modern NFL and all the medicine they have, that's a pretty significant injury. It's not just a ACL tear. We're back in 9 months, good to go. That's a significant injury.
No, my understanding is that he had inflammation in his knee for a really long time afterwards. So he actually ended up having surgery after Cam Scadaboo,
Okay.
which is again, yeah, agreed, pretty wild because he tore his ACL very early. So it's just a worry for me. Now, Scadaboo, on the other hand, I think that one of my favorite things about Scadaboo is that his game doesn't rely on speed almost at all. So if he
Mhm.
actually comes out healthy and is starting week 1, I'm into him pretty heavily. And in a Harbaugh offense, I could see them doing a rotation that's disgusting because the Ravens have done that in the past. But Scadaboo is such a grinder Harbaugh sort of guy. He's going to put his head down and just knock everybody over that I could also see him getting double-digit touchdowns just easily.
He's a perfect fit for the Harbaugh scheme. I mean, he's not a one-to-one comparison in terms of profile with Derrick Henry, but if you look at the modern archetype with running backs that are drafted early, or that are starting and that are young, they lean more towards that pass catching kind of model. And a power back like Derrick Henry, he's definitely not being phased out because he's still starting and he's still great. But like Scadabo is more of that Derrick Henry type mold of a running back. And just to have that comparison in skill set and Harbaugh immediately coming over, that the Giants not signing any free agent running backs or drafting any suggests that Scadabo is, the clear guy. Even if there's some backfield splits, it's not enough to undo Scadabo. I am he's not the player I'm most concerned about drafting, but his play style still really does. And I don't say this about a lot of players because we see a lot of different types of styles, but he runs just so fast and recklessly with his head, leading with his head, and he's one of the most polarizing picks I think in all of fantasy for me this year.
It's just crazy because that is what you would worry about, and yet he broke his ankle,
Yeah,
and
totally
just
unrelated.
the most unrelated injury you could have, a super clean break of an ankle. When everyone's like, this guy slams his head into brick walls every day, he's gonna get a concussion for sure. I don't know. I have a bias for Cam Scadaboo, and I'll just say it right here. He comes from very close to where I grew up, and not a lot of players do. And also for that guy, the slam my head into brick walls and eat paint chips, dude, to come from where I'm from is just it's so nice because it just feels so like, oh, it's not just me. It's not just me.
It's not
It's
just you.
everybody.
He does. He is that like kind of. I mean, he hasn't opened his mouth politically, but he really is that darling child of the New York media and football. Like players, like fans love him. Players seem to love him. Like he has a lot of charisma. He's a guy that's easy to root for as a player. And I'm looking at his ADP. I don't know. This is supposedly updated today, but he's going around the same range as Bucky Irving, and I am like tenfold higher on Scatabo than Irving this year. The injury notwithstanding, I just think that Scatabo, we know the Giants under Harbaugh are going to run the ball, and I would be if he doesn't get injured, I would be surprised if he doesn't finish as an RB1. Honestly, just skill and usage.
I think he's gonna have so many touchdowns in this offense that it's gonna be. It might not always look good, but he's gonna score a ton of points.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Jackson Dart's the safest. Cam Scadabo is the guy who I'm probably targeting if I can get him for 3, 4.
Yeah.
Sometimes maybe even in the second round. It just depends on who's dropping where. Like in the mock draft that's happening in my mind, third, I'm slamming him every single time.
100%. And he's the kind of player that like if you get a first round safe running back, like say you do end up getting like a Gibbs or something and you get a solid receiver in the second, like a Drake London, like if Cam Scadabo is your RB2, I would throw out any risk that you have of injury concerns because obviously you don't want your RB2 to have injury concerns or risks baked in, but if you're drafting him as your RB2, he's trending to finishing as your RB1. So, and I don't mean like, I mean like RB1, like overall on your team as an RB top 12 running back. That's where his skill set leans for me. So you got to look at like the risk, and I've talked about this before, but balancing safe players of risky players, and Scatabo is one of my favorite risky players to draft.
No disagreement there for me. Now, with this wide receiver room reworked the way it has been, Malik Neighbors, we know, and he will be drafted high. Despite what I said earlier, he's going to be drafted high by someone because he has the skill set, he has the ability to take volume. And we haven't really seen him with Jackson Dart, which is one of the sadder things about last season, is that as soon as the Giants offense looked like it was going to start clicking, Malik Neighbors was gone. So that could completely, rearrange this. But is there a pass catcher on this team that you're actually excited for? And that includes Isaiah Likely, the new tight end on the team.
I will say, I mean, with Neighbors, if again we can't undo things, but if he didn't have any injury coming into the year, I could see myself taking him top 5 overall. Like, if I had the 5th or 6th pick, I would just be slamming it for Neighbors. I think on paper, even in a run first offense, his skill and like the potential of him and Dart, like he could be easily wide receiver 1 finish. I mean, not easily. I mean, there's competition, but like everything is there for him. The lack of competition, losing Wan'Dale Robinson, the amount of volume he could get. I mean, if he gets, 13 targets a game as his baseline, that would not shock me whatsoever. And it's hard for me to get excited about another receiver on this team. I mean, even going into last year with Robinson, like he finished, I think, is like wide receiver 11 in PPR. There really isn't, again, on paper, there really isn't any receiver at his level, and he just happened to get a lot of volume last year because Neighbors was out. I'm not excited about Mooney. Slayton, we know what we got. Jalen Hyatt, we know what we got. Calvin Austin, he's a slot guy that has some big games, but I mean, and Malachi Fields, based on draft capital alone, is somebody to look at, but he didn't come into the draft as like a top 10 receiver. Like he just happened to fall into a good place and came from a system where we didn't really get to see maybe his full potential. But looking at Likely and Johnson, like I'm kind of over getting excited about Isaiah Likely as a fantasy tight end. And if he was going to a brand new team that had a totally new regime and they saw something different in him, there's something there. But he's following Harbaugh to this team, and I don't know what.
Harbaugh and his tight ends, man, that is one thing that is just bizarre to me. The only reason why I'm even kind of in on Isaiah Likely is because it's attached to Harbaugh, and Harbaugh seems to have this thing about using these tight ends. Now, I will say that if Matt Nagy has a personality in this offense, and if he had one in the Chiefs offense, we saw the willingness to hyper target the best receiver.
Yeah.
We saw that. I mean, Rashee Rice lives on a sheer amount of targets. So if this is what they turn Malik Neighbors into, maybe like, you have some of the ceiling capped, maybe just a little bit, but the actual floor is going to raise so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard for me just because I'm so worried about that ACL. Like MetLife is such a bad place to play with the ACL tears.
It is. Yeah. It's so hard because you have to have that balance as a fantasy podcaster, that like you don't want to like bake in injury, but it's hard when someone's coming off an injury like that, and there's so many factors with the the knee issues independent from the ACL tear and the MetLife factor. And it just, Neighbors is someone that like you kind of have to look at him like you did with CMC in the first round last year. I think that CMC has this lengthy injury history and he's in his 30s, but like if he finishes where he could, like that's you just got to pull the trigger, really. I mean, Neighbors, I still like him in the first round. It really depends on your draft strategy and how you feel, but there's nothing to suggest he shouldn't be a first round pick right now.
It's fair. He burned a lot of people last year, myself included, which is where I think the hesitation comes in. But looking at it, just without that, this team should have such an improvement over last year.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the one worry I have with any pass catchers on this team is that Harbaugh, as a mentality, I think would love to rely on the defense and the run game if he can. And that might hurt the volume. So, do you think that the defense is good enough to allow them to rely on it?
I was really high on the defense going into last year, and it was a bit of a disaster. And that really was not because of a lack of talent, but just a lack of coaching and coordination. And we see we have Kayvon Thibodeau, Abdul Carter, Arvil Reese, who are all young first round defensive ends. That's just and Brian Burns is also there. I mean, I said something similar last year, but on paper they have the best defensive end rotation in the league, and they only got better. So if you look at that, their secondary has some room for improvement. They lost Dexter Lawrence, which is significant, I think. But under Harbaugh, I think that all just kind of comes out in the wash. And I am very high on this defense. Very high on this defense.
Okay. So if that's the case, I think that the running, Jackson Dart and Cam Scadaboo and one of these other running backs, and who knows if it's going to be Tyrone Tracy or if it's going to be Devin Singletary, because I think Harbaugh likes the old heads a little bit.
I can see that.
One of those guys is going to have relevance, and I really think the other one's going to finish top 10. Like, if Scadaboo can stay healthy and the defense is good, oh boy, get ready. And Jackson Dart will eat no matter what in that case, because as we've seen, Harbaugh hasn't always been a guy with a running quarterback, but as soon as he embraced Lamar Jackson, it kind of changed things completely. And Jackson Dart, not the same skill set as Lamar Jackson exactly. However, Jackson Dart can run.
He can run, and they even if their skill sets are different, the way they can function in an offense and have plays called in their favor is similar enough that Harbaugh can really rely on that prior history, I think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I mean, we've seen that lead to multiple MVP seasons. So I don't see a reason why he would go out and be like, I want to prove that I can use a running quarterback, but not the same way. Harbaugh's not that dude. I'm trying to think of sleepers on this team that I like a lot, and I don't know necessarily that I love any of them. There's a chance that one of this is where I'm thinking I do like Isaiah Likely. So this is where we might be different. I don't really want to take him because of the years of history of liking Isaiah Likely and what that actually means. But I think that he's got a lot of opportunity. And Jackson Dart is a guy who clearly loves to throw to his tight ends. And Harbaugh loves to use his tight ends. And they brought him over. They paid him even after dropping all those touchdowns last year.
The only thing that gets me a little in on Likely is the fact that they lost Daniel Bellinger and Greg Dulcich. So there's not going to be a tight end by committee. I think that's pretty clear. And you could always make the argument that maybe Likely wasn't a huge hit in Baltimore because they had Mark Andrews, but he also didn't show up a whole lot when Andrews was off the field. So there's a path there, and I'm not in on him like you are, but I will say that none of these receivers stand out to me in a way that Wan'Dale Robinson did last year as a sleeper.
Which is fair. I do think that Isaiah Likely, if he slots in around that round 8 to 10 tight end, I'm probably out on him. I need him to go just a little bit later.
Yeah.
It has to be 11, 12, 13 is maybe not a full dart throw, but end of the tight end 1 range.
Here's a crazy thought, and I don't know why. I don't think this would work with Harbaugh at all, but what if the Giants signed Tyreek Hill or something? There's a market. There's free agent receivers like a Deebo Samuel on this team. See, now that's somebody to look at.
Deebo I could get with. I think Deebo makes sense. If they sign Tyreek Hill, I think this is just unfortunate because my opinion is that Tyreek Hill's done. I don't think that he's going to have anything left after destroying his leg like that. He was a fast dude.
That's fair.
But Deebo is interesting because I think having someone eating up the short routes and middle of the field would be really good in this offense. Someone that they haven't had in Baltimore that they could desperately have used.
Yeah.
That is interesting, and I could see it happening.
I guess my point is that I feel like the sleeper on this team will be somebody they haven't signed yet, especially with a neighbor's knee concern. I think this team is not done in free agency for pass catchers. I guess I'll say that.
Fair. I mean, I could low-key see Darnell Mooney or maybe Calvin Austin having an okay year. Not necessarily one that's usable in fantasy all throughout the year, but has pop-off games filling in during bye weeks or something like that.
Yeah. they could be either of them could be a respectable wide receiver 3. I think that this team is just lacking a clear wide receiver 2, and some teams can get away with that, but I just think the Giants front office is looking to sign somebody.
It's fair. It's fair. Take us away to the Eagles.
All right. Next up, we got the Philadelphia Eagles, who broke the NFC East curse of no repeat division winners that went on, I believe, over 20 years. They won it back to back. So they were the winners last year, 11-6. They got beat pretty bad in the wild card round, and their whole offense really kind of came apart slowly and then quickly under Kevin Patullo, who is gone now. Fortunately for Jalen Hurts, he has I think the 5th or 6th new offensive coordinator in as many years. So brand new offensive coordinator for Jalen Hurts. Of course, Nick Sirianni comes back as head coach. The Eagles have hired Sean Mannion, who I believe has only been in the coaching realm of the NFL. He's a former backup QB for a couple of years, and it's all been on the Packers. He spent a year or two as the Packers offensive assistant, and then he was a QB coach last year. So he kind of was part of the Malik Willis development. But he's barely older than I am. He's in his early 30s, and now he's offensive coordinator of the Eagles, which is interesting, to say the least. Didn't really see that. Somebody like with not a lot of experience coming over to this stacked offense. It's curious. And, of course, they still have Vic Fangio for year 2, but I don't know. I don't know what to make of this offensive coordinator. He's really just a blank slate.
Well, I'll tell you this: the Dolphins clearly didn't think that Kevin Patullo was the problem because they hired him as their passing game coordinator. Now, it's crazy talk to me because that offense really just looked bad from the get. Like you had, and this isn't, I don't think, a novel take. It had enough talent to overcome some really bad schemes and some really bad play. Mm-hmm. But the offense was the weak link on this team, and it was an offense that had Saquon Barkley, it had Jalen Hurts, it had AJ Brown, it had Devonta Smith, it had a ton of good pieces, and yet it couldn't put it together. So the question is, do those good pieces get discounted, and can they bounce back?
I mean, the default here is there's nowhere to go but up, and I say that out of disrespect for Kevin Patullo's offense, but also out of the upgrades that this team added, because we'll get to the AJ Brown trade rumors that are red hot right now. But, trade notwithstanding, they have Saquon back. Of course, they added Andy Dalton to compete with Tanner McKee as QB2. Maybe they're trading McKee. I don't know what's going on there. But Hurts is back. Barkley's back. Tank Bigsby's back. Will Shipley. They also added Dameon Pierce for the run game. So the run game's staying the same. Their offensive line, I think, I can't recall his name. I think one of their better guards is injured and may not play this year. But they still have Lane Johnson back. They still have Jordan, I forget his last name. He's back. So they have some old vets on their offensive line that aren't going to be around forever, but they're still there. They're still playing. They're still great. So O-line probably will be better this year. And then, of course, they have Devonta Smith, and they lost Jahan Dotson, but they added a surplus of pass-catching options. They have Mekhi Lemon, rookie first-round receiver out of USC. They traded for Dontavian Wicks from the Packers. They traded a 5th and 6th round pick for Wicks, which is significant capital for a guy who was a wide receiver 4 last year. And they also signed Hollywood Brown and drafted a new tight end in the 2nd round in Eli Stowers, and they have Dallas Goedert back. So a lot of additions, not a lot of subtractions.
I am honestly excited for the Dontavian Wicks trade for 2 reasons. One, I think there's a world in which he breaks out, but neither here nor there. I hope that this is signaling that the Packers are finally going to go with a guy. We're talking about the Eagles, but that's my hope.
I was thinking about that earlier. That will be a fun video because there's a lot of subtractions on the Packers. We're talking about additions on the Eagles. There was a lot of subtractions on the Packers.
Now, so the passing game is going to be an obvious focal point because this is what you had last season that everyone basically said this is the reason that the Eagles fell apart is their passing game can't get off the ground. They can only run the ball. They run the ball pretty well. Saquon Barkley didn't have a great season last year fantasy-wise, and I feel like that was mostly because they couldn't pass the ball. So, yeah, I think you're right. But what happens if AJ Brown goes? Who are we looking at? Like, is Devonta Smith a guy who can come and be number one, or is Micaiah Lemon now the number one? What do you think is the hierarchy of receivers sans AJ Brown?
It is hard to say. I do want to say though that Devonta Smith's fantasy career has really been the tale of mediocrity and amazing blow up games, which you don't really want from a, often 6, 7, maybe even a 1.5 round draft pick. But having said that, Devonta Smith is a few years removed from college at Alabama, but he was the Heisman winner, not the Blittenkoff winner. He was the best football in college player a few years ago. And he, again, was on a stacked Alabama team, but he was the clear alpha there. And, you can get it all to the nitty gritty of like, okay, that was a few years ago, whatever. Smith has proven that he can be a wide receiver one on a team. In Alabama, all things considered, is close to an NFL offense at times and how it's run. So I really like Devonta Smith this year. I think that he's somebody that's burned you in the past because of his disappearing act games with AJ Brown there, but it's not been because of talent. It's been because of poor offensive play calling and, having more competition. And obviously they brought in a lot of guys, but I think Devonta Smith it has the potential to have the best fantasy year of his career.
Do you think that and this is really early to ask this question, but do you think you see upside for him being a top 10 overall receiver?
My hesitation there would just be the unknownness of this new offensive coordinator. Now, if you tell me that the team comes out hot and looks great and AJ Brown is gone, I think that talent-wise, Smith absolutely has that upside. Yes.
Okay. All right. Now, Micaiah Lemon has a great name for fantasy, so I have a feeling that he's going to get drafted pretty high. Do you think that can he provide more to this offense than Devonta Smith has in the past few years as a wide receiver too? Do you think they're because I have a feeling that the Eagles are going to really try to increase their passing game output. I think they know that that's the weak spot that they have here because the defense has been great. The running game has been great, but it really needs to be a dual threat offense. It can't just be all in the running game. So if they're able to do that, is Micaiah Lemon the number 2, and can he produce better than Devonta Smith?
I think from a talent perspective, it's certainly possible. I do. There's 2 receivers in mind that this could go, and I'll flip this question to you, even though you just asked me. But I think that when you look at a first round receiver that's coming to historically a really great offense that has a lot of pass catching options, there's 2 guys from last year that I feel like Lemon could fall into this camp, and the one would be the Emeka Buka camp, where first round receiver, but there's some great pass catchers there, but he proves himself to be fantasy relevant. And then there's the Matthew Golden option where he comes into a crowded offense, a great offense, great, throwing offense, and then just is a total donut. And I don't know. I really don't know. I guess that's why I'm asking you. Right back to you.
No, this is fair. I have a worry about this because this is actually what I was thinking. And it may be just Dontavian Wicks' name staring at me. Is what I'm seeing is that if you get rid of AJ Brown on this team, because he's the clear alpha at this point, I am so worried that they are just going to enter in this wide receiver by committee, and it's going to be whoever they can scheme open, especially with Dallas Goedert there, who we know can soak up targets and we know can be a guy who pops off for random games. It scares me a little bit off of the pass catchers. With that said, Micaiah Lemon, he was drafted, he fell, he was in theory going to go a lot higher than this. So the talent level there could give it up. I guess the part that I'm having that's difficult here is that I don't know how much I trust Jalen Hurts to lead a prolific passing offense, because when I've seen Jalen Hurts have his almost MVP season, it was just deep passes, and he was great at them, but it took a lot to get there. Can he do it again? Is that the offense they want?
It certainly seems like that's the offense they want, but that doesn't mean that Mekhi Lemon's going to be the benefactor of that. Obviously, they used high draft capital on him, and AJ Brown is most likely on his way out. I guess the rookie status notwithstanding, there's some concern I have with Lemon's usage that isn't the same as Smith's. I think that there's still going to be questions marks with Smith, but we've seen Smith like have a volatile target share each and every year, and he's still had great games. And I'm not worried about Smith in the same way I am about Lemon.
That's fair. The question marks on this team as far as the pass catchers go, I think means that there will be value here, because I also would guess that other people are going to have the same question marks. I don't think mine are very novel, but it's just hard to actually like be willing to invest.
It really does. It will come down to the ADP. I think that regardless if Hurts improves significantly as a passer or not, I think they are going to have him passing more. I think that's kind of just written in the stars. And I think Hurts, he could be fantastic this year. He really could. I mean, he still produced as one of the best fantasy QBs on a broken offense last year, where they were having him throw the ball and it just wasn't working, but he still had so many rushing touchdowns, and he just has a bevy of options to throw to. I think that Hurts, like, if I'm taking dart throws on like the top 5 quarterbacks in that, range, which I usually don't, like, Hurts is the one I lean to as having the most upside, I think.
I like Hurts too, because I feel like you can tell pretty early on, like the confidence level that he has seems to dictate his game to a certain point. I mean, I remember that near MVP season, and he was, just like his vibe was off the charts.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there are quarterbacks that are similar in that way, where it's like you can tell exactly how well they're doing based on how he seems to be. And so what I like about that is that it's a very early thing. You can see, all right. But I also, I'm waffling a little bit here because I also don't really love early QBs that much. Like if I had to choose between him and Jackson Dart right now, I might actually choose Jackson Dart. I think I probably would.
Oh, I would too. I think Dart will go higher than maybe some expect, but he's not going to go at the Hurts level. And I guess my point would just, be Hurts compared to like Lamar Jackson. I would lean Hurts pretty easily there.
That's fair. Saquon Barkley. He was highly drafted last year. Of course, there was all the red flags, warning signs. You had everything you needed to kind of fade him, but not everyone did. And he ended up having not a great year, and maybe for not the reasons everyone expected. So he's kind of in this weird middle ground. Can Saquon Barkley bounce back from the year he had last year? Can he show kind of the same burst, the same juice, or is it gone now? Do you lose it and it's gone forever?
There's nothing to suggest that burst. I mean, he suffered for all those years on the Giants where he had injuries, of course, but he had some just anemic offenses. And I would encourage others to shake off the recency bias of what he looked like last year. He burned you, and you see that because you took him probably like 1, 2, 3 overall. It's not because he had a terrible year. He had a solid year for a running back. It's just he was coming off his sky-high season. And, of course, he is getting older. He's been injured in the past, but he's not been injured on the Eagles. And he has a pretty damn good O-line. I think that I'd rather take Barkley over like a Jonathan Taylor right now, which I think looking at ADP, that's a hot take, but I have more confidence in the Eagles offense than the Colts offense, or maybe even Devon Achane on the Dolphins offense. I think if you look at Barkley's past, I expect a season to be more akin to 2 years ago than last year with the changes they made.
I think that having a better balanced offense is going to help Barkley anyway. They need to get into the red zone more for him to score more. And I think if they are passing and the passing game starts clicking, that's going to be better. So I like him if you're getting a discount at all.
And that's what it's trending right now. I think he's still a first round pick to me. I'm sorry.
See, I will bet that he's going to be mid-second to end second by the time we draft. And I think that right there, he's going to be just an easy pick. He's going to be the old guy that no one really likes that comes back and has a really good season.
I totally agree. And that's where he's going right now, is mid-second.
Yeah.
There's questions about the OC, but I think the pieces they do have speak for themselves. And the defense, they traded for Jonathan Grenard, who had been a monster on the Vikings. They also added Reek Woolen, which he's been super up and down. He's a corner on the Seahawks, but they have Reek Woolen is their cornerback 3 right now, which is, you have someone of his talent. Like, they have an incredibly good secondary with Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Like, there's just a lot to like in this defense. They lost some pieces, but they replaced them pretty seamlessly. So I think that the run game is going to be a big factor. I think the passing game being more of a focal point is not going to come at the expense of the run game, and vice versa.
Yeah, and I think with Vic Fangio, you shouldn't count out any defense, really.
Yeah.
Now, last little teeny bit here that I want to ask you: if AJ Brown ends up staying on the team, because there's always that chance, would you be willing to draft him in the first 3 rounds?
Probably not, but having said that, I do like him, like, immediately after that. And also, having said that, if AJ Brown stays, I would consider breaking my rule of taking an early quarterback and going Jalen Hurts, because that is just an unbelievable offense if he stays.
If AJ Brown stays, honestly, and I was out on him last year, I'm back in on him this year if he stays, because say what you will about AJ Brown, I think with his mentality, you can kind of feel it. I think he would want to come out and be like, look, you guys were wrong about me. It was all Kevin Patullo's fault, and that's why I'm going to do so good this year, and I'm going to catch 100 balls, and they're going to throw them to me, and they will, because that's the only way he stays, is they have to make some sort of, like, we are going to throw you the ball 28 times a game, because we know that's what you want now, and you will be our guy. So if he stays on the Eagles, I'm so in.
I agree to an extent. I think if he stays on the Eagles, that does suggest that he's still their clear wide receiver 1, and he's going to have a better year. I think there are other landing spots that I like him more, and there's also some that I like him less. So I think that if you look at the receiving core as a whole, I think AJ Brown staying on the Eagles kind of, for me, is like the middle option, perhaps.
Fair. Yeah. Anything else with the Eagles?
No, I think that I guess I'll just say I like Barkley this year. I think people need to get out of the recency bias.
Yeah. All right, let's move on.
Next up, we got the Manders, aka the Commanders. Now,
aka whatever they're going to get named to next, based on political actions.
The Washington MAGA team went 5-12 last year after an elite and surprising 2024 season under Jaden Daniels. That was, we talk every year about teams that kind of come out of nowhere. Like the Bears last year is a great example, but the Commanders really came out of nowhere 2 years ago. And Jaden Daniels in fantasy and some of the options he had then were just, there were some league winners in there for sure, particularly with Daniels. And of course, he ended up getting injured last year. Extremely gruesome injury on primetime. And he had a bevy of other injuries, I believe, as well. But looking at the past 2 years, it's the tale of two teams. There is a total 180 from the year prior. But the one thing that is consistent is Dan Quinn is returning as head coach. He is bringing in Cliff Kingsbury, I believe, left on his own accord. I don't believe he was fired. I think his contract was up, and he just decided to pursue other options. I don't think he's signed anywhere yet, but I think he just left the team.
I will say he did assign. He is the assistant head coach of the Rams.
Oh, that's a cool move for him. I like that. I mean, if he's not in the spotlight, because he was a fringe head coach candidate this year, but if he's not in the spotlight and the Rams have a great season, I think that's a slam dunk head coach pick. That's a smart move. They did bring in David Blow. It's his first year as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, and one of his, I think, first years in the NFL as a coach. His name actually rings a bell. I think he was the quarterback the year that Matthew Stafford went down with a back injury in like 2019. Like he's been a quarterback semi recently.
Yes, it's. I know that if you listen to the fantasy footballers, you've heard his name because they yelled out Blau every time he was featured in an episode. And
Yeah.
that's about all I know about him. He wasn't very good as a quarterback. But as far as backups go, he was okay.
And he was playing recently, so he's a newer coach. He's coming in as offensive coordinator. I think he was maybe coaching somewhere last year, but regardless, it's his first OC position. And then they also added Durante Jones as the defensive coordinator, which is curious because I think in other cases it would just be okay. Well, Dan Quinn hired this DC, but he's still calling defensive plays, and I think he still is, but Durante Jones was the Vikings defensive back coach last year, and the Vikings had a pretty elite secondary relative to their talent. So it's an interesting choice. It almost suggests maybe a lack of faith in Dan Quinn, which I personally have.
All I'm saying is that if Todd Bowles had done the same thing, we'd all be cheering for him. So
Yeah.
I'm proud of Dan Quinn for recognizing, hey, the defense wasn't as good as it needed to be. Maybe I should bring in someone else so I can focus on all the other stuff I'm going to do.
It suggests something. I mean, when you bring in somebody of that weight and that you had that experience last year, it suggests that it's not just going to be the Dan Quinn show on defense. At least it feels like to me. And of course, you get Jaden Daniels back. Hopefully, Marcus Mariota returns as well. There's been some additions, but the subtractions stand out a little bit more to me. I'll start with that because as of recording this, Austin Eckler and Zach Ertz are not signed, and they both had very devastating injuries. Now, these guys have been fantasy superstars in the past, but they are, past their prime, regardless of whatever juice they have left. And you could almost lump in Deebo Samuel to that as well. It seems like Deebo's time in Washington is over. His contract is up. He's not resigned. He'll probably go somewhere else. And on the defensive side of the ball, I'll just mention it because they lost a lot of elite old heads. Like Von Miller has not resigned. Bobby Wagner's not resigned. Marshawn Lattimore is gone. So this team has lost a lot of players and have not added a whole lot. And I think that's noteworthy because looking at this receiving core, I mean, we got Terry McLaurin's back, but the de facto on the depth chart, wide receiver 2 and 3 right now are Luke McCaffrey and third round rookie Antonio Williams. That's not a good core.
No, we're at the point where they've been hyping up Treylon Burks. That's a bad place to be. So Now, do you think that means Terry McLaurin's going to be a slam dunk pick for volume, or do you think that means maybe someone could bounce out of this group?
I mean, so similar to the Giants, I feel like this team is not done adding their wide receiver 2. They just really can't be. That's one way to put it. They don't. I mean, Terry McLaurin has been great in the past, but he's not that Malik Neighbors type volume guy. He's never really been that. Even in his best years, he was like 2 years ago when he was great. He got a lot of touchdowns. So he's more of a red zone boom or bust, mostly boom guy, but he's not like a target hog. And I think among the people that could break out, the obvious one would be Antonio Williams. I talked about him on the last episode, but the abridged version is just that he was on a Clemson offense that stunk last year, and he has shown himself in college in the past. So he's the guy to watch, but I do have a feeling that he's going to get overhyped, overdrafted real quick.
That's fair. I wonder about Luke McCaffrey because Luke McCaffrey had some flashes last year, and I know that one of the big sticking points with Cliff Kingsbury was his usage of Luke McCaffrey. People thought that it wasn't enough, like that he should be actually used as a receiver more. I don't know that he has the skill set to be a strong number like wide receiver 2, but I think there's a chance that he's featured a little bit more than we're guessing.
I'm glad you mentioned that specifically because he didn't have any really big games last year, but again, there's a new offensive coordinator. There's a new system here, so that it could lean in more to that he was just underutilized. He wasn't like living up to expectations.
It's really hard to say that I'm like strongly in his corner though at this point because you also have to ask the question, right? Jaden Daniels, can he stay healthy for a whole season? Can he actually make it through a season? Now, even if we're looking at just his play style. You also have to factor in the FedEx Field and the Washington curse,
Mhm.
because at this point, every quarterback that they have that looks amazing washes out of the league in 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, RG3 is the classic example, but like they even like Taylor Heineke, he had like one solid year. Like Alex Smith was on the Commanders when he basically destroyed his leg. It's been consistent. It's the new high drafted rookies, and then just really they have not had any stable quarterback presence since the Clinton administration. Is that hyperbolic? I don't think so.
No, and it's unfortunate too, right? Because like Jaden Daniels is a player. As a QB, I would love to be able to say, hey, he's someone who you should go out and get because he's got the skill set for it. But it's scary. It's scary.
It's scary. And there could be an argument that he could transcend that if he had like a receiving core like Jalen Hurts has, but he doesn't. This might be the worst receiving core in the league.
If it weren't for the Raiders, I would agree with that.
I guess I'm factoring in tight ends as well.
Okay, that's fair.
Because they have Bowers.
So not a lot of faith in Chigakonkwo, I take it.
I mean, if we're talking about potential breakouts of what they have now, he's probably the one that makes the most sense to me.
Yeah. The it's a lot of dart throws, right? So I think Terry McLaurin, he'll probably go relatively late based on what he's gone in the past because last year he did not deliver at all. And it wasn't all his fault. There was a holdout, and then there was the Jaden Daniels injury. So he basically had one good game, and the rest were just marred by asterisks, mud. Yeah. It didn't make any sense. I think that if Terry McLaurin ends up falling to like 6-7, jokes notwithstanding, that Terry McLaurin could be a value pick.
He could. I was higher on him than most last year, and he didn't return that value. But again, there was factors outside of that. He's getting older, but we've seen receivers produce in their 30s before, and I think that 2 years ago he was great, and that was when Daniels was healthy. And I'm looking where he's going now, and I'm not even seeing him pop up as a high end receiver. Let's see where he's at here. Looks like he's going around average ADP of 51.
Oh my gosh. 51, yeah. So he's like end of fourth, is that right? Or beginning of fifth? Or is that 51 on receiver?
It's overall.
Okay. And that's interesting. That's close to the line where I'd be like in or out. I like him more because last year we had a disagreement about this. I went out on Terry McLaurin. And the issue was that they added a bunch of people, and I can't trust Washington to be good 2 years in a row.
But you were right.
It's not just losing Debo, but it's losing Eckler as well for me. And I know Eckler wasn't there the whole time, but also this last season was a really weird season. But there's so many targets that are opened up. And he's going to have to be a focal point of that offense, especially if none of these receivers aside from him step up.
Mm-hmm.
That I could just see if Jaden Daniels stays healthy, which is a big if, gigantic if, I know that. But if he stays healthy, I could see them just chucking some more of those moon balls into the end zone. And Terry's really good at coming up with those.
He is. And Daniels, like, even though McLaurin wasn't the most hyper-targeted receiver, he's so efficient with Daniels in the end zone and getting yards. And I think that if Daniels is healthy, like even if another receiver steps up and breaks out, that's arguably almost better for McLaurin because he's not going to be that focal point of the defense.
We haven't mentioned the running backs, and I think there's a really good reason for that. And it's like, as we're here and having to talk about them, I still don't really want to. So we have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Bill, who was hyped, looked like he was going to live up to some of that hype, and then immediately fell off a cliff. Just looked awful. We have Rachaad White, who I could say the same thing about just over a period of years instead of just one season. And then we've got Jerome Ford, who I could say the same thing about just over the period of 2 seasons ago. And then Katron Allen. a low drafted rookie. And none of these names and none of these people can fill you with hope for the running game almost by any mean. If, and this is the key denominator here, if Jaden Daniels stays healthy, I think one of these running backs is going to provide value for you, because a running quarterback like Jaden Daniels almost always provides some value for the running game.
Yeah.
If you're going to ask me who it is, I have a real hard time. I don't think Bill's going to be the dude. Honestly, I really don't. His style just doesn't fit with me very well. But you're going to tell me that Rachaad White's going to bust out? I don't know. Maybe.
It's hard for me because, looking at these running backs, and obviously Bill had a few great games to start the year and fell off a cliff. But there's two answers to this for me, because like the Commanders also had a couple great games and then fell off a cliff, and Daniels was not healthy. We haven't seen Bill and Jaden Daniels play together very much, so that's a big factor here. And again, there's always volatility with this, but I do like their O-line. I really do. I think that Josh Connerly Jr., right tackle out of Oregon, he came into his own a bit at the end of last year. They still have Laramie Tunsil, gave him a big contract extension. Sam Cosmi is their star right guard. He was injured, I believe, for a lot of last year, if not most, and he'll be back. And their O-line, I think, is above average on paper. So similar to the logic with the Carolina Panthers, but to like a less exciting extent. Like any team that has a really possibly elite O-line or like above average O-line has the potential to really make the run game more special than it might appear. So I think with the running backs, though, I think there's going to be some truthers out there for Rachaad White. Shout out Corey. He loves Rachaad White. He's going to draft him. I know that. And I agree about your logic though with Bill, is that his style of play and his build doesn't really lean into like immense upside, but it's just tricky. I really don't like this running back core, not because I don't see any potential, but because it's really just, pick of the litter, like throw a dart.
And as I always say, in those situations where you don't know which one it is, you should throw a dart. Like, it's gross, but you should just end a bench, toss one of these guys, because someone will break out of here. And maybe not break out in like the standard fashion, like, oh, he's a league winner, but like break out as in he's a usable piece on your team that you got for barely anything.
In theory, like if Daniels is healthy, there's going to be a running back on this team that gets you a solid flex spot, 10 points per game. If Daniels is healthy and the offense was what it was 2 years ago, that just seems like a pretty solid given. I think. I
love the idea of what Eckler was bringing to the team again before he got hurt, right? And that is where Rachaad White makes a lot of sense, because he can catch the ball. He's not as hard-nosed of a runner as Eckler, right? And maybe I'm missing someone with Jerome Ford. Maybe he's that guy, or maybe Katron Allen could be that guy. I think there's like some gray area there, but Rachaad White seems like if Bill is going in like the first 8 rounds, then maybe take a shot on Rachaad late.
It could certainly happen. I just looked this up here, and this is not in relation to the Commanders at all. I don't think I think he was a 1-year deal, but Eckler a couple weeks ago did clear recovery from a torn Achilles, and he said he intends to play in 2026. Now, 30-something Eckler coming off an Achilles is not appealing, but if he is cleared already in May and he wants to play and he resigns with Washington, it's hard to hate him on this team, even with this logjam of a backfield. I think that Eckler, a lot of things have to go right, but he stands out as like the guy that could be that spot.
So I'll make an assumption of Jaden Daniels being healthy, because that's just the easier way to go through this. If Jaden Daniels is healthy and Eckler resigns, I don't hate Eckler, because I think he provides that veteran presence that knows when to sit on a potential like option.
Mm-hmm.
And he could catch a solid number of passes to be used as a flex. I mean, what we saw last year, what I was talking about, and it was something that I had looked for at the beginning of last year, is that he was used relatively well. He wasn't exactly a barn burner, but he was, the sort of volume he got was a useful volume. And I think you could have that again, where he's catching these passes that maybe they're not all fruitful, but they are getting you points, especially in PPR.
Yeah, and especially if Again, there's a lot of factors here, but if he does lean more into that PPR pass catching role, which really was a huge asset in fantasy, then if they use him more as a receiver, and God knows his team needs receivers, like that's another piece of why he could be valuable, I think.
Mm-hmm. I do also wonder if maybe one of these wide receivers is used more as a running back at times, or like in a similar role, like out in the flats constantly. The thing I would say, if you're looking at this team and you're wondering who, like, what are the levels of risk I'm willing to take, you just have to look at Jaden Daniels. If you believe that he can stay healthy the whole season, I would upgrade almost everyone from this team past where they're being drafted, because they're all going to be drafted pretty low. Even Terry in the 4th round could have some value, going early 4th as opposed to the end or the 5th.
Yeah.
But like I would be willing, if you think Jaden Daniels is going to be healthy, I would be willing to take dart throws on Antonio Williams, Luke McCaffrey, Rashad White. So I think there's going to be value here, and I think that the fact that it's so kind of gray and complicated and confusing is what's going to keep you kind of with a low risk investment.
Especially because, and like, unless something significant changes, and it really won't, because we don't know about Daniel's health for the whole year. These guys are going to be, like you were saying, staying in the low end. There's not going to be inherently a guy that shoots up to, way higher than he should be. I think the ADP for these guys is going to stay pretty low.
Mm-hmm. And I think they're worth dart throws. These are the guys who I will have one of these people on my team just on the opportunity that it is them that blows up. I mean, I think Luke, just with the way they talked about him and like how we saw him stick through certain things last year, I think they probably like him on the team a lot. My guess is that Luke is going to be a neat little sleeper that has potential to be, a wide receiver 3 on your team.
I disagree, but I will say that I do, my sleepers here would be Antonio Williams, Chika Okonkwo, and Terry McLaurin in the 5th round.
Fair. There's not really a lot else I have to say about the Commanders, because this is a team that had such a bad season last year. It was so marred by injury. It's really hard to prognosticate.
Yeah, I agree. The only other thing I will mention, and this is just rumors at this point, but Brandon Ayuk is heavily rumored to the point where it's basically already happened, a cut candidate for the 49ers after June 1st. And he's been linked to his team because of the Jaden Daniels Arizona State connection. What do we feel about Brandon Ayuk? Commanders notwithstanding, I mean, it seems like that's the most likely prediction right now. Is Ayuk? Do you think he has anything left on the tank if he goes to the Commanders?
I'm not willing to draft him. Let someone else deal with that headache. I think if he ends up as a free agent, we see him get any sort of volume week 1, I'm into spinning large on him. Mm-hmm. But I am not willing to draft him. I wouldn't be shocked if he's basically as close to blackballed as you can. Just dipping out on your team completely like that is got to be a really bad look, regardless of what you're trying to do.
You took the words right out of my mouth, because I was literally thinking that, like, if he shows up like week 1, week 2, and has a couple really great games, like, I think that's sustainable because of what we've seen in the past. So you can blow a lot of fab on him if he shows up immediately. I think that's going to continue, but I agree, I wouldn't draft him.
Because there's a world where he gets like 1 or 2 targets and he scores a touchdown in week 1, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm in. And then it just kind of stays like that.
It's the volume. It's the volume you want to see. If he gets, it's 5 or 6, 7 targets, 3 catches and a touchdown week 1, that's something like, oh, okay, yeah, let's look at this. But yeah, I agree. Look at the volume.
Take us to our last team, Willie. Let's
wrap it up.
Hit them.
All right, this one is actually probably maybe the most exciting offense we've talked about so far. That's the Dallas Cowboys, and of course they went 7-9-1 last year. Missed the playoffs, had a historically bad defense. I mean, historically, maybe relative to, I'm saying in terms of the Dak era, just really not a lot of talent. They, of course, fired Matt Eberflus. They should never have hired him, whatever. But this is an interesting coaching staff because they have Brian Schottenheimer returning for year 2. The Cowboys were really written off offensively because of this hire. He was just kind of an internal hire that no one was excited for. And, their finish notwithstanding, like, their offense was elite last year. I believe they were second in yards and or in passing yards. I think second in yards overall, one of the best offenses in the league with Schottenheimer calling the plays. So he proved himself, I think, much more than he was given credit for. So that's something to look at. They hired Christian Parker as their defensive coordinator. He's a hire I like a lot because he previously spent some years as the defensive backs coach and the passing game coordinator in Denver and then Philadelphia. So regardless of the Eagles' struggles last year, the Eagles' struggles last year was certainly not on their secondary, and that was what Christian Parker was leading, and he was learning under Vic Fangio. So I think that this could be a fantastic hire for the Cowboys, and nowhere to go but up with Eberflus gone. So this coaching staff is something to get excited about, I think, for the Cowboys.
I don't have a huge amount of opinions on this coaching staff. I'm still Brian Schottenheimer. I mean, I agree. He had the number 1 passing offense last year, and top 10 rushing offense. And that's in spite of, what we had considered a lack of talent at the beginning. So there's something to be said there for sure. But also, George Pickens showing up the way he did and CeeDee Lamb being there, to me, makes his job so simple and so easy.
For sure.
But I mean, it didn't change. So
but that was the point I was going to make, is this team has probably had less volatility than anyone we've talked about so far, because of course Dak is back. We got Joel Milton and now Sam Howell as the backups. Javonte Williams signed a pretty substantial 3-year deal to stay with the team. They lost Miles Sanders, but they never really had him to begin with. And they didn't add any running backs in free agency or the draft. So it's still going to be the Javonte Williams show. The curious thing here, so they have CeeDee Lamb hopefully fully healthy this year. And George Pickens had an incredible year last year. But instead of paying him, they signed him to the franchise tag, which is, I don't think a lot has come out from his camp about how he feels about this. I know that he signed the franchise tag, so he intends to play with the Cowboys this year. But, knowing Pickens and his ego, if things start happening in camp, like, I don't know, like Lamb gets injured and Pickens is the number 1 again, like, this is something to watch, I think, as a long shot trade, just because of Pickens' ego and how we saw him show up last year, because he's playing on a 1-year deal and he's not making as much money as other receivers that aren't as good as him. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because Pickens, it can't be understated the year he had last year. It was amazing, phenomenal. He had a better year than CeeDee Lamb, and CeeDee Lamb was a top 10, top 5 overall pick. So I agree. And I think that having both George Pickens and CeeDee Lamb begs the question of who do you take first at this point. I think CeeDee Lamb is still going to be the dude, but like, is that the right answer? Do these guys both drive their prices down to where it's just great, grab whoever you want?
It's kind of a headache for me. I mean, maybe a better headache than most, but like right now Lamb's going as wide receiver 5 and Pickens is going as wide receiver 9. And I mean, could they finish in those positions? Certainly. I mean, we saw it. If Lamb had been healthy last year, we would have seen it. But I do have faith in this coaching staff and this offense, but it's really relying on a lot of passing volume that we saw to repeat, which is risky.
What happened after the Cowboys traded for Quinnen Williams? Because I know their defense got better. Did the passing offense change at that point?
Their passing offense, like after the Williams trade.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I wonder about, because I know that one of the big stories about the Cowboys is that they're going to be in shootouts all the time because their defense can't stop anyone, and I think we did see that. But also, it changed once Quinnen Williams got there a little bit, and I do believe at that point CeeDee Lamb was already hurt, but there may have been overlap between the two of them.
That's a good point. I think that I think he might have moved the needle a little bit in terms of a defense getting better. I think it got better down the stretch. I don't know if that's because of the level of competition or whatever, but even regardless of with Quinnen Williams being there, they did use a high draft pick on a guy out of University of Central Florida, Malachi Lawrence, Donovan Ezeraku showed some flashes last year. They have Caleb Downs, who is perhaps the best defensive player in this draft. So he's coming into the secondary. So the defense got better. It got much better. I mean, again, Matt Eberflus nowhere to go but up. But I agree. I think that's a good point because the level of production we saw from Pickens and Lamb last year was because of the shootouts, and I don't see that repeating. Talent wise, it could be there, but the level of shootouts is not going to repeat this year.
It's so interesting to me because you're right, it is a headache, and I do think that if the shootouts are gone, one of these players is going to provide value, and the other one's going to be a disappointment. Maybe not like a full bust, but a disappointment.
Yeah.
And if I had to bet, and this is maybe not the best bet, but if I had to bet, I think I would take George Pickens right now over CeeDee Lamb because I like the idea of his teammates trying to get him paid.
And him trying to prove himself. I think that's a good place for him to be.
Mm-hmm. Same. So, and it's not like CeeDee Lamb necessarily needs to prove himself, although CeeDee Lamb can't have like a bunch of bad years in a row. That would look bad for him. But also, Javonte Williams is the guy who, looking at this team right now, I think I might be most excited to draft, which is the scariest thing I've ever said in my life at this point. It's up there anyways.
I'm going to have to agree with you because I'll ask you a question, your opinion in a second here, but with Javonte Williams and just the complete lack of change that we saw, I mean, I was down on Javonte Williams. A lot of people were not super high on Javonte Williams. He blew past every expectation. And the thing is that the O-line is exactly the same, more or less, as it was last year. They have not added any running backs, and they paid him. That's a big piece. So there's really nothing to say that Javonte Williams is going to get worse than last year. It would just be, happenstance. But the thing that gives him a boost is that the defense has gotten better. And the run game, they have a lot of faith in him, and the Cowboys like to run the ball. So I don't expect Javonte Williams to be better than he was last year. But at the same time, the way this offense is structured and the way the offseason has gone, things lead into him being better, which isn't likely, but it is leaning that way.
It's interesting to me because I think having both of the wide receivers healthy and out there actually helps also Javonte because it means that they really can't stack boxes. And
Yeah.
Dak is, like you can have whatever debate you want about with Dak as a quarterback. He's a good enough quarterback that they can't just let him pass on them willy-nilly.
No.
So Javonte is in a really good position with this offense right now. And I would guess that he's going to go like mid-second. He's going to be that dude. And I think he'll probably return value there.
I'm looking Javonte here in May. Where is Javonte going?
He actually doesn't exist anymore.
Oh no. But at least we have the memories.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like I'm tripping right now. Where is Javonte Williams?
Yeah, I'm seeing him as number 36. So end of the third round. And yeah, that's an easy pick for me.
That's an easy pick for me too. I mean, like, again, his time in the Broncos was not great, and that's why I was low on him last year. But he was pretty banged up in Denver. Denver did not have a great offense the time he was there, and he was a highly drafted running back. I believe he was a very early second-round pick out of UNC a few years ago. So
as a rookie, he flashed really hard too. Like, it was just the injury that really derailed him.
The injury and then coming back to a Russell Wilson offense really just changed the narrative around him. Yeah. And again, I just don't think he's a one-year wonder because of how the Cowboys see him and how he played last year. So yeah, he's definitely the player I'm most excited about on the Cowboys. And I do want to pose to you real quick. I have my answer already, but if the way ADP is now, if it's similar come August, right now CeeDee Lamb is leaning towards a late first-round pick, and George Pickens is leaning towards an early third. Who do you like of those two if you had to pick?
George Pickens. We saw what he did last year, and it wasn't just like this fluke. He made some really tough catches. He had some really highlight reel plays that were, he looked like every part of a top 5 receiver.
Oh, yeah.
And if CeeDee Lamb wasn't there, who also managed to look the opposite, he had so many lowlights last year where he was dropping the ball constantly in really high pressure situations. It wouldn't shock me to see George Pickens, and this might be a hot take, I don't know, have better stats than CeeDee Lamb at the end of the year. Both stay healthy the whole year.
It seemed like Lamb, obviously he was injured, but even if even if Lamb played in every game, it appeared stat wise that Pickens was still going to finish with a better year.
Mm-hmm.
My answer to this is a little tricky, but I'm afraid of drafting either of these guys right now. I do agree that Pickens in the third is way more appealing to me than Lamb in the first, but the factors of the defense getting better, the unclearness of who the wide receiver one is. This isn't really a Jamar Chase, T. Higgins situation where they're both great, but Chase is so much clearly the better talent that, Higgins in the third feels comfortable because the offense is good, but we're still going with Chase. Like both of these guys are so close for me that it's hard for me to get any confidence about either returning value of where they're drafted.
That's fair. That's fair. I think I'm in on Pickens almost regardless at this point. I think that the franchise tag will upset him, but in a good way.
That is the one thing for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think that like you can't. I know that there may be no statistical real advantage of having players on contract years, but you can't tell me that with certain players it's not helpful.
Oh, absolutely. And it is curious too, because I think that he will be with the team. But if there is a situation where Pickens is traded, like I agree. I don't think his talent last year was a fluke. So I really do think that he has the potential to be really good wherever he's at. There could be better spots for him than the Cowboys based on competition for targets, but I don't think he's a fluke.
It's so hard because like when you saw him with the Steelers, right? The whole thing with the Steelers was that the quarterback play through Pickens' time there was just really bad. I mean, we're talking Russell Wilson again. We'll bring up his name, We're talking Mason Taylor. We're talking just whoever, or Justin Fields.
Yeah, I think Kenny Pickett was the quarterback he played with the most, unfortunately.
It's really bad. So like, we saw him with the Dak, who is a good to great quarterback, depending on how you feel.
I'm in the great camp.
See, and that's fair. And he blew up. He exploded. And those contested catches over and over and over and over and over and over and over again appear to have been just part of his game, not the only part of his game. So I am a little bit worried if he gets traded. There's a lot of teams out there that are bad that could trade for a wide receiver. But there's also a lot of teams that I think could use a wide receiver one. And if he goes to some of them, he might just get peppered with targets over and over and over again. I talk a lot about the Raiders, but this is a situation where, and I don't think they'll do it, but if they did do it, there was talk of bringing in Pickens over the offseason if he didn't get tagged. And having Bowers and Pickens would be the perfect situation for Pickens for me, because Bowers plays a different part of the field but commands that respect. And then Pickens doesn't have to get like 60 people on him at all times,
I say this unbiased as your friend, because I actually was thinking the Raiders would be a good fit because, as unknown as we know what the Raiders look like this year, they will have a better offense. I think we can agree about that. And they're a team where they have that alpha with Bowers, but does not compare to CeeDee Lamb in the sense that like Pickens and Lamb, there's a lot of unknown there, but Pickens and Bowers, that's a slam dunk. Like both of those guys can feast. So yeah, an offense like that would be a good fit for Pickens. I do think he stays on the Cowboys, and it'll be interesting to watch their ADP this year. I don't know.
It really wouldn't shock me if Lamb is mid first and Pickens is high second at the end of it. And it's just going to be good luck, pick whichever one you think is going to work the better. I'm in on Pickens. Not only is he cheaper, but I also think he's got more to prove. And based on what I saw last year, I think he can prove it. I really do.
I'm still not comfortable taking Pickens in the second round, but I will say that as of today, I'm out on CeeDee Lamb in the first, just based on the unknownness of it all.
Those drops last year were really bad. And CeeDee Lamb could bounce back. There's certainly more likely that he does bounce back than he doesn't. But does the Cowboys, do they continue to give him those high volume, constant looks? Because that's really, CeeDee Lamb has constant looks and he can take over a game.
Mm-hmm.
But what if he doesn't need to? what if now someone else can help him and they have more places to go than just toss him the ball?
Exactly, and obviously it's good to have another good receiver if you're an elite receiver because it means not having double coverage. But Pickens is such an elite receiver that it just becomes a competition. Like I said, it's not the Chase Higgins situation. Like Higgins is great, but Lamb and Pickens have that higher floor, I think, in this offense. And I think regardless if Lamb has a bounce back year, what that would look like to me with Pickens on this team would be a bounce back year where he gets like 12 to 1,300 yards and 6 or 7 touchdowns. That's not mid first round value. That's a really good year, but that's like a second or third round pick.
Jake Ferguson. We haven't brought up his name. It could be a solid tight end value. I don't know exactly where he's going ADP wise because it's too early to say. But is Jake Ferguson still someone you can get excited about?
I mean, I feel the same about Jake Ferguson as I did last year, and he had some disappearing games, but I think as your tight end, if you have a good draft, otherwise he's not a bad pick. I think he's going around tight end 9 right now, which is probably where I'd have him. I don't really see him fluctuating a whole lot, and he's a solid tight end 1. He's not going to win you a league, but you want to. The tight end position is so wishy-washy that taking starting tight ends from good to great offenses is the way to go. So,
Yep. Okay. Fair enough. Do you have anything else about the Cowboys?
No, I mean it is an even year for Dak, and we've seen in recent times that he's gotten injured every other year, which kind of sucks. But I don't have a whole lot of excitement for Joe Milton or Sam Howell, but I think that even if Dak gets injured, the offense isn't going to fall off a cliff.
That's not Cooper Rush levels then.
Yeah, no.
I just can't imagine another year where Dak is out and then they stick with him. If Dak goes down again, I think they're going to get another quarterback the next year.
He's quietly become one of the oldest quarterbacks in the league.
It makes sense. I mean, he's missed a lot of time too, so it makes sense why it's quiet,
Yeah.
You feel like the amount of time he's played versus the amount of years he's been the starting quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys is a little bit lopsided because of his injuries.
Yeah, I think I agree. Like if the Cowboys, if they have an every year, like the year that Dak broke his leg, I think they have pieces now to kind of mitigate this. But if the Cowboys have a year where they have like 5 wins and players are injured, things don't go their way, Dak is injured, and they're in that range in the next draft to get like a Dante Moore, I think it makes sense to move on from Dak. Not to say that he has something to prove this year, but injury histories are a thing, so something to watch.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so NFC East, give me your way too early prediction.
This one's tricky for me too. I'm gonna lean towards the Cowboys this year as kind of a gut feeling to win it. I think that if they didn't have Eberflus last year, and if CeeDee Lamb was fully healthy, and now we have year 2 of Brian Schottenheimer, I mean they could have easily finished with 10 wins, which would have done it last year. And again, other teams have gotten better as well. But I think the Cowboys defense is going to be good enough this year that they'll win the NFC East in a close one. I do have a lot of faith in the Eagles this year as well, so it's hard to bet against them. They're my number 2 pick. It's going to flip flop between the two for me. I just think that my gut's telling me Cowboys. And all my reservations about CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens don't stem from real life stats. It's just stemming from fantasy. I think they're both going to be awesome this year. I think the offense is going to be great. So all of that discourse aside, like this is just fantasy. So in terms of real life, I like Cowboys, Eagles. Giants are a sneaky team. I want to be more in on them, but I think the Cowboys and Eagles just have more chemistry throughout the years that they could probably push ahead. But I'm not going to rule out the Giants winning the NFC East, which is kind of crazy, but their defense is pretty incredible. Harbaugh's a culture changer. They have some super, super good weapons. So they're in that mix. And I don't want to rag on the Commanders anymore, but there's nothing about them that suggests they have any upside in any position relative to the other 3 teams. I think that Jaden Daniels being healthy the whole year, he could have an incredible season, but he's not enough to save this team. The year they went to the NFC Championship, I don't want to say it's a fluke right now, but they went to the NFC Championship with a bunch of guys that are not on their roster anymore, and they got lucky in some games, and I just don't see them. I don't see them winning the NFC East. I would actually be surprised if they did.
That's fair. The Commanders feel like they're a team that's like one loss away from a tank job, you know.
Yeah.
I think I'll go with the Eagles still repeating. Even with the losses on the defensive side, having Vic Fangio, I think he's such a good defensive coach. He just really is. And then this is where I'll shock you a little bit. I'm going to go with the Giants over the Cowboys.
I could see it.
And then the Cowboys, and then the Commanders with Dan Quinn losing his job at some point during the year.
Yeah.
And if Jaden Daniels gets hurt again, it's going to be just I really hope it doesn't happen, because it's going to be such a rough year for them. And there'll be so many questions raised if he gets hurt again.
It almost feels like if he gets hurt again, depending on the injury, like you almost win a mulligan, because if he gets hurt again and nothing else about his team changes, they're going to be picking him a top 5 again.
And then who knows where his career trajectory is after that. Yeah. Let's hope against that. Because I want Jaden Daniels to hang around. So okay. So that was the NFC South, NFC East deep dive. If you watch this and you hang out with all of it, congrats on being a sicko like us. Thank you very much. We will be back in a couple of weeks to do the other NFC North and NFC West divisions.
Nice.
Of course, that means we get to talk about Willie's favorite, the Bears, and the Super Bowl winners, the Seahawks. So that'll be an entertaining one. I was gonna say something about like what happened in this episode. That doesn't make sense for you here. You know what happened in this episode. Doink out.
I'm ready.